Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Hudson Martin.
And I'm Corporal Patrick Apone Guerra.
And Patrick, we are continuing our series on the Alien franchise this week, talking about my favorite film from the franchise, which is the sequel from 1986, Aliens.
Yes, Damon, Aliens indeed, released July of 1986. It stars Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, Carrie Henn as Newt, Michael Biehn as Corporal Hicks, Paul Reiser as Burke, Lance Henriksen as Bishop, and the late great Bill Paxton as Hudson. Written and directed, of course, by James Cameron, and the budget was reportedly around $18.5 million, and it had a worldwide box office of $131 million. Damon, that opening trailer is about as epic as the whole movie's going to be. Like that's a great way to like open this thing up, because Aliens is big and bad and nasty and fun, Damon. Like one of the most fun movies you'll ever watch.
It is just action packed. It is nonstop. It's a great story. The performances are off the charts. And I would argue, and I know this is a conversation we'll have throughout this podcast. Listen, I'm a big sci-fi fan. I grew up on Star Wars, and I adore Star Wars to this day. Like I still watch The Mandalorian. I watch Ahsoka Tano. I watch all the shows. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I like sci-fi in general. But I would make the argument that Aliens may be the greatest science fiction film of all time, like just start to finish. Like, you could compare it to 2001: A Space Odyssey. You could, of course, compare it to Alien, and a lot of people would obviously compare it to Star Wars. But I think top to bottom, start to finish, dollar for dollar, I would take Aliens against any other science fiction film that's ever been made. When you just look at the story, the performances, the action, everything that happens in this movie is like there's very few movies I would call perfect. This is a perfect movie. And do you realize how rare it is when it comes to sequels for a sequel to be this good? I mean, they had the conversation in Scream 2, name a sequel better than the original, and someone said, Aliens, and I think it was Sarah Michelle Gellar who said, you got a hard on for Cameron. I got a hard on for Cameron, Sarah Michelle Gellar, because this movie is spectacular.
It's nothing short of amazing. And it's funny, last night, prior to this recording, I was at a holiday party with my friends and their children, right? So we're talking about kids as young as 6, like my son, all the way up to 12 years old, and then all of us adults. And of course, we all grew up on Aliens. We all agreed Aliens is absolute fun. It's fun. My 6-year-old likes it. My 9-year-old likes it. My 12-year-old nephew loves it. Like it's just a lovable movie. You can love on this movie, Damon. They make it really easy, and I think you nail it about one thing. Like I would say, Star Wars has the original Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back have a scale that is very difficult to match. But performance-wise, Aliens gotcha. Sorry, Star Wars. Like, yes, of course. Like, Star Wars is incredible. It really is. It changed the game. The reason we're talking about the Alien franchise today is because Star Wars was successful, where a lot of sci-fi before that wasn't necessarily the most successful. It was almost kind of a B movie genre, if you will. Even Star Trek, which is very beloved, it was sort of a B movie TV show. That's kind of how sci-fi was going for so long, until Star Wars came out and showed you that it could literally take you to other planets. But the performances in Star Wars, well, they leave a little to be desired. Let's be honest. Like they really do. What you get with the Alien franchise, especially Alien and Aliens, is dynamite performances, dynamite characters, really some of the best, some of the kind of characters you could actually grab onto. And then you have another secret weapon, Damon, another nuke it from space type weapon, James Cameron. James Cameron at this time is a guy who had been working in the business as a production designer, who had directed some small things, and as you mentioned, was working on Terminator, and I believe had done Terminator by this time. He was something special. He was something different. And I do believe, forgive me for blowing my load like immediately, I believe James Cameron's the best action director of all time. I don't think anyone's going to get as good as James Cameron other than the next guy who studies James Cameron and learns why action can be that good. He just knows how to deliver action in a way that no one else does. It's in the pacing. It's in the shot selection. It's in the way he walks you in to these action sequences. And Aliens is very much an action movie, an action sci-fi, an action horror a little bit. Yeah, I think there's definitely a horror element to this movie. But it's just, I mean, it's a wild ride, Damon. It literally feels like sitting down at, like, Disneyland in front of like a screen on one of those motion controlled rides, and you're like going through the ride. That's how this movie feels.
Yeah, it's nonstop and it's kind of crazy. So we're going to talk about the film. We're also going to talk about the special edition, which is technically the director's cut that was released years ago. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But the wild thing is, I timed it. Like, you don't really get to a true action set piece until about an hour in.
Yeah.
And I
With
listened
the special edition?
with both of them. The special
Okay.
edition is not that much different. It's about 5 minutes, maybe 5 6 minutes.
I think it's longer than that.
It's about an hour. Well, no. I'm talking about until the alien show. It's about a
Oh, yeah.
difference
Got it.
to that point. It's about an hour into the movie before you really get to an action set piece. And you remember the last time we talked about Alien, I said that, you couldn't do that in a modern studio film because they just go, oh, you got to put something in there, and 10 minutes in, there's got to be a big action sequence. And I know we talked about that last time. During the commentary track for Aliens, we go and listen to it. James Cameron flat out says, like, the studio argued with him. Like, they're like, no, you got to get something in there like 20 minutes in. So what we're saying is absolutely true. Like, they did not want him to wait an hour to show the aliens. But he said, I promise you, like, let it work out. Let it go the way it's going. And at this point, you got to remember, this isn't James Cameron now who can tell Disney, I'm going to make 8 Avatar movies and you're going to give me $1 trillion and I'm going to take 2 decades to make it. You're going to sit there and smile about it. This was James Cameron, whose only directing credit coming into this was Piranha 2, The Spawning, or whatever that one's called. He had no other directing credits to his name besides Piranha 2. When he got approached to do this, it was as a writer because the Terminator script, this was 83. Terminator hadn't come out yet. So there was buzz about Terminator, but he didn't have that kind of, name in the industry. He was just a guy that people were like, oh yeah, this guy can write. Like, he's a good writer. Let's see what he could do with aliens. It's also wild to me. Talk about the difference in times. Like, when I say that no studio in 2023 would allow this to happen, where you go, an hour before you see the main antagonists in the film. Another thing that is so wild to me is like the trust and the scope that they gave basically a second time director. And it's wild to me, Patrick, that it took 4 years for them to be like, this Alien movie did pretty well. Let's do a sequel. Like, 4 years. Do you realize how quickly a sequel would get greenlit today? If this movie opened and made $100 million, they'd be like, greenlit next day, you're getting a sequel.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that weekend it would be decided. Yeah, the times have changed. Alien came out still during the very beginnings of the blockbuster era, and it was still in this weird territory where Alien was like this sci-fi horror, right? So it was two things, and they were like, well, what do we do with that? This was the old guard studios. These were the old men studios at the time. So they weren't thinking like that yet. They didn't know how to pounce on something, but they knew to pounce on James Cameron. They knew there was something special about this guy. And eventually they give him the keys to the car. I think after seeing Terminator, they're finally like, fine, you could do this. Like, you really know what you're doing. I love the legendary story of, like, they're in the court conference room, and somebody goes with regards to the Alien sequel. They write the word alien and then they put the S and then they add the dollar signs and go aliens. And they gave it to the.
That's how the title came about.
That's how the title came about. And it's so smart, right? Like, alien, aliens. And you just go, yeah, more of them. There's going to be a lot this time. That's cool. And then you hand it to the right guy. And boy, believe me, that was just a stroke of luck. Terminator could have easily been a one and done situation, but no, James Cameron was special. He's nothing but tenacious. We know that. Now you just don't bet against him. You know, this past year they did Avatar Way of Water, and everybody goes, nobody gives a shit about Avatar anymore. It's going to be like a big box office disappointment. It made $1 billion in the first month. Like, you cannot bet against this guy. But you're right. This was back then. This is pre-Titanic. And Titanic, by the way, for him, like, for all intents and purposes, the first week like totally failed. Like it was a bomb at the box office. It took word of mouth to make all the money that it made. Like James Cameron's just one of these guys who would not give up. And it was perfect to hand him a character like Ripley. First of all, he's really good with female characters. He just did, like, James Cameron knows what to do with them, which I'll be honest, like, some of the greats still don't know what to do with female characters. They still have trouble with them. You just watch them and you go, yeah, okay, this guy's a great director, but he you know, women are still just like a chess piece in his game. James Cameron was like, no. Women can be the forefront. They can be the badass. They can be the leader. And something that really struck me when I was watching this was that first hour, or just under it, is very much about the class dynamics of this new world that Ripley wakes up in 60 something years after drifting in space in hypersleep. And that's very similar to Alien. Alien had a class dynamics right away. And I don't know how intentional that was. Dan O'Bannon was probably had a lot of intention actually in the script, and it just happened to come out in the screen on screen very well. But in Aliens, you got James Cameron, who is very much a director with a message. He likes doing that. He's despite being an action director, he believes in putting a message in his movies. And those scenes where Ripley is being interrogated by the corporate Wayland Yutani, corporate suits, is very much a class dynamic situation. These are all like these high level corporate people who can't understand what she's saying, and they don't know how to handle the situation. And she's just like, fuck you guys. And they punish her for this situation that happens, right? And then, and this is something that I think is more clear in the special edition, one of those corporate executives, Paul Reiser's Burke, decides, hey, let me send a message over to our colony on 426. And let me tell them to go investigate what Ripley was talking about. He's doing all this on the sly because he's interested in it for the weapons division, because he's a slime, right? And like this is James Cameron making commentary about the corporate ladder and how things work. He sends a couple of colonists out there to prospect the situation, and they like the idea because maybe they can keep what they find. It could be valuable for them, and they come across the ship. It's the ship, Damon, from Aliens. This is something you don't see if you haven't seen the special edition. You get to see the alien ship yet again. And this little group of prospectors, a husband and wife and their children, one of them being sweet little Newt, they come across the ship, and the dad comes back with a fucking face hugger. This was Paul Reiser's plan. And then we got to go, you know what? Hey, Ripley, by chance, I know you're working on the loading docks these days. You've been decommissioned and all that good stuff. But hey, maybe you want to help out these Marines who are going to go over there, because now we got a problem over there. I don't know why. No idea why, but we should go over there and check it out. Cameron is showing you the machinations of corporate greed and nastiness. It's so advanced. It's the kind of stuff you read about in the news now. Cameron is doing in 1986. It's crazy.
It's also a credit to the casting, in this movie, because part of the reason that Burke, played by the great Paul Reiser, he was selected specifically because they didn't want him to immediately stand out as this sleazy corporate, shyster. They didn't want him to stand out as a scumbag they did not want him to stand out as a rat fuck son of a bitch.
Thank you.
They wanted him to be a guy you look like you could trust. And at the beginning, he did. He did seem like a guy you could trust when he says, oh, we're going out there to destroy him. We're not going out there to bring him back. There's no saving this. We're going out there to stop him. And so Ripley signs on. Also, I want to mention one other note here that I was going to talk about a little later, because I made notes of all the things I learned watching the commentary for this movie, which I'll go over later. But one thing I did, and I knew this before because there's a great series on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us, and they did an episode on aliens in this most recent season, which I absolutely adored that episode. Great episode. And here's the crazy part about this movie getting made. When James Cameron is told, "Hey, you got the green light, write the Alien sequel." He writes the sequel, gets it all in there, and basically what he did is he took his Mother script, which I mentioned in the intro, recrafted it, reworked it, added in Ripley, added in a few different characters, changed the setting, things like that, and then reworked it into Aliens. At the time, the studio hadn't even approached Sigourney Weaver about coming back. They hadn't even asked her. She had no idea they were doing this. And so James Cameron writes the entire script with her in it. She's obviously the centerpiece. He presents it, they're like, great. Well, now I guess we got to go get Sigourney Weaver. And he's like, the fuck? You didn't get her yet? And so as part of the negotiation, Sigourney Weaver got paid $1 million to do Aliens, the highest paid actress ever for a movie at that point in time. The highest payday of her career at that point in time. She got paid $1 million. First actress to earn $1 million, and it was because the studio fucked around and didn't bother to sign her on for a sequel they were already making. And so she got paid $1 million. But going back to your point about that with Burke, like, the class dynamics are very much at work here. Even with one of my favorite parts of this movie, which we're going to get deeper into the plot and everything here, throughout the podcast. The power dynamic, as we learn throughout the Alien franchise, is the corporation has a lot of power. Weyland-Yutani wields a lot of power. But one thing I love when it turns is when they go to the planet, the aliens attack them, they get their asses kicked, and they're basically trying to figure out what to do. And Ripley has the iconic part where she says, I say we take off and nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. And Burke is like, whoa. We're not doing that. It's like, this is not going to happen. I can't authorize that. And she turns the tables on Burke by saying, oh, actually, you know what? This mission is under military jurisdiction, not you, asshole. And so she turns to Corporal Hicks, and he's the one who repeats the line, we take off from orbit, take off and nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. It was awesome to see that power dynamic shift again. Because typically speaking, when you think of the military, you think of blue collar guys and girls. You don't think of the military as this like executive corporate program. These are soldiers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's even generals, like they are soldiers. That's a different feeling than the corporate scumbag who's there to look after the company's best interests. So I love that shift in the dynamic even in the movie.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And that moment when the Marines get their asses kicked, there's another great little dynamic there too, which is right before that. And I'm bouncing around a little bit, but James Cameron's so great at world building. When they're in the mess hall, and you learn that Bishop's there and all that stuff, when they're in the mess hall, like all the Marines are looking over at Gorman, Officer Gorman. If you don't know this about military, officers tend to not go through boot camp and all that stuff. They tend to be kids of privilege that go straight from university to decision-making levels in military. They don't, not all the time, but they don't often do all the grunt work to work their way up. They usually come from a different class system. That was apparent in the mess hall. Everybody didn't like Gorman. He was sitting at the other end with Burke from the corporation, with Ripley, who was handpicked by the corporation to help out with the situation. When they get into the drop ship, Gorman has done simulated drops. He's never even been in a real drop. And they're rolling their eyes. They're like, this is the guy in charge of us. The officer, Gorman, who's in charge, fucking hasn't seen action ever. And when they're getting their asses handed to them in that first ambush, he's panicking. There's sweat running down his face. He doesn't know how to lead the charge. Ripley takes over. She's like, she just goes, get him out of there. Like she has to step over the people of privilege to make the call. And then you get to the point where so many of the soldiers have, including Sergeant Apone, who was leading the charge, they get wiped out to the point where it's Corporal Hicks who's there. He's the only guy in charge, and he considers himself sort of a grunt. right? No offense taken. That's what he says. He kind of wears it as a badge of honor, but now he's in charge. The blue collar people, Ripley, who was an officer on a ship, who was outranked back on the Nostromo, and Hicks are now in charge. And when in that moment when Burke's like, whoa, I can't authorize that, they're gonna kill him. They're like, fuck it, we'll just kill him. Oh no, wait, or am I jumping ahead? Maybe I am jumping ahead.
You're jumping ahead on that one, yeah, a little bit.
I'm jumping ahead. That eventually down the line they decide they're going to kill him and they get interrupted before they do that. But the point is like the commentary that is just like these corporate heads don't really give a shit about us. It's the same old story. We're still expendable to them. They still have product to move. They still have things that they need. They have priorities. Despite the fact that lives are being lost, they want to do this thing. That's advanced talk in the 1980s. 1980s was all about corporate greed. Wall Street was one of the biggest movies of the 1980s, and it's just about people getting greedy, getting theirs. Aliens is sort of a sci-fi version of that, but the difference is they're blue-collar, hard-working people who are pushing back against it. It's super advanced theme for 1986. They weren't doing that in 1986. It wasn't popular to talk like that in 1986 in the Reagan era, to just go, yeah, these corporate people are full of shit. Let's just fuck them up and take care of business.
Yeah. Let's talk about the story, because one thing, so again, I'm going by the commentary that was on the track. It was recorded in 2003. And James Cameron talked about when he wrote the script, he wanted it to pick up in a way that connected directly to Alien, which is where we find at the beginning of the movie, Ripley has drifted off in her escape pod, but she never got back on track to where she was supposed to go. She ended up drifting aimlessly in space, and she's discovered 57 years later. She's been in this cryo sleep for 57 years, and it's just a salvage team that just happens to come across the ship, and they find her and Jonesy, the goddamn cat, still alive. They defrost her, they bring her out, and then she meets Burke. Now, one of the best sequences of the movie is when we first meet Burke and Jonesy comes back in the picture, is a dream sequence when she has the chest burster come out of her. You know, she has the nightmare that she's infected or she's impregnated and the chest burster's coming out. We don't actually meet Burke for the first time really in that moment. Now, I don't want to get to the special edition yet, because I want to talk about all the differences with the special edition. Now, I'm telling you this ahead of time though, Patrick. I like the special edition better. I think the special edition is a better overall film because it adds a few layers to the script, to the plot, that actually makes it make a little bit more sense, particularly where Newt is involved. But again, I don't want to get there yet. We'll go back to that. But so they find Ripley, she survives, then she has to go before this, like basically an inquisition board where they're trying to find out what happened on the Nostromo. They say they corroborated part of her story by the flight recorder, but, you know, a big part of her story doesn't make sense. You got to imagine Ash and, you know, the corporation hid, covered up all the, you know, our plan to bring an alien back to Earth didn't work out. Shit, we better cover this up. 57 years later, everyone kind of forgets and moves on. And so they're basically saying it's her fault. They're more or less saying this was your fault. We don't have any proof of any alien. We have terraformers and colonists now living on this planet. They're perfectly fine. You're lying, or you did something terrible and now a lot of people are dead. So they throw her out. They throw her to the wolves. And then Burke, as you mentioned, hold on now. I kind of believe this crazy lady. I think there might be something worth exploring out there. Let's see what's out there. And lo and behold, however, they never say if it's like weeks or months later. We know it's a time period in the future. He shows up, Lieutenant Gorman, at their front door. Canadian actor Bill Hope plays Lieutenant Gorman. They show up and they say, we've lost contact with the colonists on LV-426. We're going to send this badass group of Marines out there to investigate, but we want you there as an advisor. We're not going out there to explore. We're not going out there to contain. We're not going out there to study. We're going out there to destroy. We're going out there to destroy this venomous species that may have taken over these colonists. And so she doesn't agree to do it. She's basically like, you throw me to the wolves, now you want me to help you? Fuck you. And so she shines them on, continues to have these nightmares. She wakes up screaming in the night. The whole, you know, the trauma, the PTSD of her experience with the alien on the Nostromo calls up Burke and says, all right, you're going out there to kill him, right? Of course we're going out there to kill him. All right, I'm in. And then that's where our story picks up with the Marines, and of course, they land in LV-426, and all hell breaks loose. What I love about this story, there's a million things I love about this story, but one of the things we talked about a lot with Alien was the scope of it all. While it's on a spaceship, it does still feel very contained. You have one alien on a ship with, 7 crew members, and it is very horror. Very horror. It is a horror film set upon a spaceship. This film is very much an action sci-fi movie with a tinge of horror. We're not even pretending this is a full-on horror film. And James Cameron has said as much. He said, there are horror elements in this movie, but I didn't lean that far into it because I wanted to make it set in the same world, but I couldn't redo what Ridley Scott did. I had to do something different, or people are going to say, you just redid what Ridley did. If you just put him back on a ship and there's an alien there, it's the same movie. You may tweak it and have new characters, but ultimately it's the same movie. So he actually understood the assignment. He's like, I cannot go out there and try to redo what Ridley Scott did. I have to make this my own movie. How do I do that? Well, let's bring in some badass Marines. Let's bring in other characters. Let's add in this corporate greed element. And let's take him to that planet, and let's add in a shitload of aliens. So there's no longer one alien, there's hundreds of aliens. The scope is so much bigger, the film is so much bigger, the action is way bigger. And I appreciate that because he understood, he knew anything less or different than this would feel like he was just trying to copy what Ridley Scott did. And he couldn't do that and be successful. And so that's why, to me, Patrick, Alien and Aliens as a 2-film combo, yes, I understand. We're going to eventually get to Alien 3. And I want to talk about Alien 3 a little later when I talk about James Cameron's commentary on this movie. I think Alien and Aliens may be the greatest 1-2 punch in film history. Just talk about 2 films in a row. Mm-hmm. I understand Godfather, Godfather 2, obviously very classic films, held in high reverence. Terminator, Terminator 2.
Yeah, great.
Incredible. That's also up there. But I think what I love most about Alien and Aliens is they are set in the same universe, same character. Ellen Ripley is our lead character. But they are so different in what they do, yet somehow they find a way to do it.
They find a way to do it because James Cameron is a genius, right? Now we throw that word around all the time. Genius, genius, genius. No. That James Cameron is a genius. There's something special about him. I was actually just watching an interview with two more diametrically opposed directors, James Cameron and Greta Gerwig. The two of them talking together, it was kind of incredible because you could see they have completely different brains. They understand each other perfectly. James Cameron can do things like no director can do. He can take what happened in Alien and make it work. This is a companion piece to Alien. Everyone's, I've said over the years, like, wow, these are they're two completely different things. But the world building in Aliens is very much a companion piece to Alien. It is the fallout from terrible corporate decisions that caused what happened in the events of Alien. He sets that up. James Cameron can build a world like very few people can. So he sets all of that up perfectly. He walks you into all of it very easily. It was this time around was more shocking to me how close the beginning of this movie is to Alien, like how important those stories intersect, because he's like, I need to bring that character from that world into this world. This is a whole new world for Ripley. She's literally going to walk into something completely different than what she was dealing with then. Now it's a whole new game. It's a whole new world with a whole new set of complications. The first of her great complications is Burke, right? The corporate guy. Because she knows better than to trust fucking corporate scumbags. But she can't get over what's happening to herself. Like she's like you were saying, she's suffering the PTSD, the trauma of what happened. She can't get over that. And then she finds out that indeed the people on LV-426 are dealing with this as well. So she's compelled, but only only if she can get the word of Burke that they are going to get rid of this shit. And you're right, the casting of Paul Reiser was smart because he was very boyish looking. He had a baby face at the time. He had gentle eyes. Like I could already see the casting like gears turning when they were like, this needs to be a guy we can trust. And the whole time he's assuring her. Now you and I know because we've watched this movie, I don't know, 1,000 times. You don't trust the corporate fucking scumbag, but she did it out of desperation because she has in herself the heart to say people can't go through what I went through. So if it means stopping this thing, I'll do it. The next complication, I loved this. It's so subtle. The next complication was in the mess hall when she discovers that Bishop is on the ship too. I fucking love that this time because it mattered so much to the first movie. I've always understood that, but I was like, oh, that's where like that's where you get the first sense that Ripley cannot trust the situation she's in. No one told me there'd be a droid on this ship. And then Paul Reiser goes, oh shit. Oh yeah, she was on that Nostromo. like again, he kind of brushing it off. And the little James Cameron touch in here, the Cyberdyne systems.
Yeah.
It's straight out of Terminator. I fucking love that. And I've always loved it. But like this time I was like, it's so cool that James was like, let me bring a little bit of my world into this. The Cyberdyne, if you don't know, the Cyberdyne systems comes from the Terminator. The Terminator was built from Cyberdyne systems. And so he's making the connection that, yeah, Cyberdyne, they're another evil corporation. They built the droids for the Nostromo, and the Nostromo nearly killed everybody. It was a fucking psychopathic droid. But she has to try and get over the fact that now she's on a ship with a droid again, and she doesn't know how to trust him. Played by the great Lance Henriksen, of course. Everybody knows Bishop. Lance Henriksen, icon, and to me, this is one of his most iconic roles. And he's trying to be very gentle with her. He's very understanding, but why the fuck would she even bother trusting him? Like that's not going to fly. She has no reason to trust Bishop. And all throughout the movie, that's a complication to her. Like, can I trust this droid? Is he going to fuck me over like Ash did? It's fantastic. It's a fantastic complication. Well, and then go ahead.
I was gonna say that was to me one of the best character developments in this movie because again, when you meet Burke, he seems like he cares.
Yeah.
He seems like he cares about Ripley. One thing I picked up watching this film again and watching with the commentary, one thing I don't know if I never knew this or I never noticed this, but they actually say they don't specifically say it during the movie, but Ripley never goes back to Earth. When they find her in her apartment, she's still on that gateway station. She never left the space station where they took her to. So she's never gone back to Earth, which I found, I was like, wow, that's true. I guess she never gets home. She never actually goes back to Earth. Yeah. But they set up Burke to be kind of like the guy who's in Ripley's corner, because even during the meeting with the big stooges in the stooges in the corporate setting when they're interrogating her, Burke's the guy in her corner. He's the guy who's like, I believe you. Obviously he does, because he sends the colonists out there to find the ship and they all die.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that is the Bishop character, who we find out is the droid, who is the humanoid. When he does the knife game with Bill Paxton's character and he has a little bit of the milk for blood, and Ripley freaks out, and as the great Private Frost says, I guess you don't like the cornbread either. But the great switch in this movie is Burke is the scumbag and Bishop is totally totally trustworthy. He's everything he said he was in the beginning. I could never harm a human, but the way that they pepper in suspicions about the character all the way till the frickin' end of the movie, there's a great moment when they land on LV-426. They realize the aliens are very much real. They've attacked the colonists. The colonists have all been wiped out. They go inside the structure, acid for blood, the whole thing. It's all in shambles. And they find the facehuggers. And there's a great scene where Bishop is basically dissecting a facehugger under a microscope. And one of the guys brings him some stuff. He says, "You got everything you need, Bishop?" "Yo, Bishop, you got everything you need?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he looks at him with a very sinister look. that whole time you're like, don't trust this guy or this thing. Don't trust this humanoid thing.
This
Even,
artificial human, as he likes to be called.
even when they realized that this crash of their ship that was going to take them back up to the main ship, after that happens, they realize they're trapped on the planet. Even after that happens, and they're like, well, the only way we can do it is to bring down the other ship to save us and remote pilot it down to the planet. Bishop's like, I'll do it. Like, I'm the only one qualified to do it. And of course, the Hudson's like, yeah, man, Bishop should do it. Good idea. But even in that moment, when he crawls through a tunnel and goes out into the unknown, even then you're still not sure if you can trust him. And then again at the end, when Ripley goes and finds Newt, brings her back up to escapes the Queen alien, and she goes back up to the surface, waiting for Bishop in the ship, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And again, you're like, fuck this guy. He was everything that Ripley thought he was. And he shows back up and saves the day. Then he gets ripped in half by a Queen alien. But that suspicion about Bishop, because of what happened in Alien with Ash, permeates every single scene he's in, where you're kind of like, I like this guy. He's kind of charismatic. He seems different, but I can't trust him because of what happened with Ash. And you do not fully learn to trust Bishop until it is really too late for him. You know what I mean? You don't really fully be like, this is a good guy. And then 2 seconds later, he gets a alien tail through his chest and ripped apart in one of the coolest scenes in the entire movie. But that is a credit to the script and the performances from Lance Henriksen, from Paul Reiser, and from a script from James Cameron, that they were able to keep you on your toes that much throughout the entire movie, to where you're like, the one guy, that's one thing James Cameron said. You absolutely couldn't he was the most trustworthy guy in this entire thing. He really was there just to help, and he really did. He really had no part of him that could ever allow a human being to be hurt. That was real. That was real the whole time. But you don't know that until the last 15 minutes of the movie.
And that, Damon, that whole through line is a direct companion piece to Alien. That's what struck me so different about this movie during this viewing, was how close it stays to the DNA of Alien in that respect. Because I always looked at them as two separate things completely, but truth be told, that was super important to Alien and super important to Aliens. And you know, like I always just, and by the way, if people might not know this, Ridley Scott kind of hates Aliens. Like, he doesn't like it, and he doesn't think it belongs in because, you know, Ridley Scott, by the way, is maybe the most world-class blowhard of all directors. But and he's right up against Cameron, who himself is a notorious blowhard. But like, he was just like, yeah, that's not what Alien was. So why does Aliens look like that? Like, he's kind of annoyed by Aliens, even though probably deep down he's like, fuck, that movie's fucking good, isn't it? But James Cameron, despite the fact that he put his voice and his style and signature all over this movie, that through line that runs all the way to the end of the movie has everything to do with Alien. And so now I don't see them as two separate things the way I used to. I go, no, these two things are interlocked in perfect harmony. And it's because James Cameron respected the material that came before him and just built over the top of it, this incredible world. Can we talk a little bit about, you know, and there are multiple, by the way, that's one complication amongst many, because James Cameron, as a great action director, realizes you need to keep continually stacking complication upon complication upon complication. Newt, I would argue, is the next complication. Burke is the next complication. The ship crashing is the next, or the ship crashing and then Burke is the next complication. And then like losing more Marines is another complication, being ambushed again. Like, he just knows how to keep stacking it. It's incredible. But here's something that really stood out when I talk about signature James Cameron here. The design of the aliens this time around, Damon. Different. And I think Alien has kept this theme going, which is every time you meet the aliens, they're going to be designed differently. And I'm talking about just the regular aliens that come. We're going to get to the Queen Mother. Don't worry about it, folks. We'll get to her. But the aliens themselves were wholly new. Now, I love the design of the original Alien. I love the sleekness of it, everything about it, the Giger design. This is like they built upon the Giger design this time. You notice like their heads are way more ornate now. There's a lot more design in the elongated phallic head, and there's way more like piping off the back of them. There's more of them, obviously, because it's aliens. But I was very proud of, excuse me, how different these aliens are to the original Alien.
One thing I mentioned, Stan Winston is the one who did the creatures in this film, the great Stan Winston. Which if you don't know the name Stan Winston, just look him up. He's done a million. He's an Oscar. He's an Oscar. He's done a million. He's an iconic creature creator. He was hired to do the creatures in this film, to do the aliens, and they very specifically said we have to make them look a little different. They can't all look just like this because we're not going to find a 6'10" guy to put in a costume. We have to make them look different. And so they made all the aliens look different. And I love that little design difference and that stood the test of time, which you have to credit James Cameron for, because he could have easily just copied the one Alien. And then by the time you get to Alien 3 and dear God, we're eventually going to get to Prometheus, they all look the same. I like the fact that he's like, this is a different. These are soldier aliens. There's a queen alien. There's a hierarchy to the aliens, like even though you don't realize it. And one thing that I love that that James Cameron said about this movie, is that he knew he couldn't get a bunch of 7-foot people to walk around in alien costumes, but he also mentioned the one thing you got to realize is that alien that was in the original Alien was a baby.
Yeah.
He was born and wiped out Nine Kyre's crew in 24 hours. That's a baby. The aliens we meet in Aliens have been alive or present now for weeks, if not months. Like I said,
Yeah.
by the time Ripley is approached by Burke to go back, we have to assume months have passed, not weeks, because they have to discover the alien ship on LV-426. They have to bring back the guy with the face hugger. They have to send more people out because it's not just one. They have to send more people out to investigate. They come back. They get infected. They're doing experimentation. They've got the face huggers in glass vials trying to investigate, understand what they are. They put up barriers. They've fought back. They've obviously killed some because there's this giant, acid-filled hole through the middle of their station. So we have to imagine this is a months-long situation. So by the time and also the travel, they find out the communication is broken down. They contact. We have to remember what they said in Alien. It would take 10 months to travel from LV-426 back to Earth because that's how long the space travel was. Now, 57 years later, let's just assume they're a little faster. But again, maybe it's 6 months. It may take them 6 months to get from Gateway Station or wherever they're at, Gateway Station to, or 5 months, 3 months, whatever it is. So by the time they interact with these aliens on LV-426 now, they could be a year old, 9 months old, 10 months old, whatever the timeline is. So we're dealing with a more advanced version of the alien. The evolution of the aliens, that evolves in the look, that evolves in the behavior, that evolves in the in their smarts, how they do things. I mean, because one thing I absolutely adore about this movie, and I do in Alien as well. Again, credit where credit's due to Ridley Scott. We talked about this. We did our Alien podcast where we said the alien was the ultimate survivor. When Ripley punches the self-destruct mechanism, the alien realizes what's happening, and so it sneaks onto her escape pod because that's how it has to survive. What we learn about these aliens in Aliens is they've evolved even further. Now we know there is a hierarchy, meaning the queen is the queen. The queen mother is the queen alien, and they all bow to her, which we learn very specifically when Ripley meets her for the first time, and she threatens her with the fire and then points the fire down at her eggs, and she waves off the soldier aliens. They listen to the queen mother. That's one. Problem solving in this film is a huge part of the aliens because they keep discounting it. Hudson says it a couple times. He's like, how can they cut off the power, man? They're animals. They are animals, but they are an evolving, smart species. Just like they realize when they can't come down one hallway, they're going to find another entrance, and that's how they end up finding the air ducts where they end up crashing in towards the end of the movie. They're smart. They're evolved. They understand. They figure things out. This is an advanced species. They may not have language and they may not have writing and they're not, sitting down creating music, but this is a smart, evolved species. And I love those little subtle differences from Alien to Aliens. And again, you may not be thinking about it as deeply as we are right now, thinking, oh, yeah, this is probably like a year later, like when the LV-426, when the colonists actually find the facehugger for the first time, to when the colonial Marines land there with Ripley, it's probably a year later.
Yeah.
That's how fast this species has adapted. In a year, they're pretty intelligent. Another thing, last thing I want to mention about the intelligence and smarts of the aliens that I love, this little detail that was added in. And again, they didn't say it. They don't beat you over the head with it in the film. But when you watch it and you understand it, you're like, oh, shit, that's right. When the Marines find the colonists through their personal data transmitters, Hudson finds them. They're all in the sub-basement 3. The Marines go to investigate. They travel down this basement. And Ripley notices something. Aren't they standing right over the fusion reactors? And Gorman panics, and he's like, oh, shit, they are. And he's like, if they fire down there, it's a thermonuclear reaction, and, adios muchachos, as Burke says. The aliens planted themselves there because that was the safest place for them to be. They knew that they couldn't be attacked in that area without risking the entire place going up in smoke. Now, I know that's a very subtle detail, but when you think about it, that was a plot set forth by the aliens. They put themselves in a position to where they were safest in this sub-basement. Somehow they knew that was where they need to be, and the humans or anyone coming for them couldn't actually do them harm or risk harm to themselves. Very subtle detail in the movie, but I pick up on it and I love it every single time, because when you realize that, you're like, oh, they're not there by accident. They're not there just because that's where they landed. They're there because they know that's their best place with a chance to survive. These are survival creatures.
You don't dare kill them. It's the same principle that we learned on with Parker on the ship when he says that in Alien. They're smart. They have evolved to the point that they go, how do I protect myself in the best possible way? And they did that by huddling in near the reactor, knowing that it's too risky to attack them down there. Super smart world building. Again, it's James Cameron. I guarantee was combing hours and hours and hours over all the little details to make sure everything made sense as best it possibly could. Damon, do you want to start talking about special edition?
Yes. So there was a special edition. I'm going to call it the director's cut, but they call it the special edition of the film. It was released in, I believe, 1990. Mm-hmm. And this was that when I realized it was released in 1990, that's when I realized that's when I saw these films for the first time, because I saw Aliens on CBS on a Saturday night movie for the first time ever, and it was the special edition. They had added in all the extra scenes, probably because they had to cut out a lot of the cursing and things like that, so that was where they added it in. So the first time I ever saw Aliens was on CBS Saturday Night Movies in 1990, 1991, whatever the timeline would have been, and it was on the special edition. Now, the special edition, James Cameron has said he prefers it. It's the version he wishes he could have put out in the theaters. And unlike Alien, which we talked about the director's cut last week, where Ridley Scott actually edited the movie and it came out 1 minute shorter than the theatrical version, which is wild to think about. Because when you think about director's cut, you're like, oh, it's extra time. He actually cut the movie down, added one major scene, which we addressed last in that episode. But by and large, it was the same movie. They just edited it more and added in one key scene. This film is vastly different. So let's just go through some of the major differences real quick, then we'll talk about them. Right away, we learn that Ripley's been out in space for 57 years. And when she lands back at Gateway Station and Burke meets her, we learn Ripley had a daughter on Earth named Amanda. Amy is what she calls her. There's a great scene where Ripley is in this like digital auditorium, like with like, you know, basically like a digital park, more or less, like a hollow deck in Star Trek. And Burt comes in and he discovers that her daughter Amanda was 66 years old when she died. Ripley was gone so long that her daughter lived a full life, got married, and died on Earth. So Ripley's devastated by this. Now, just to mention it, one of the reasons why I think that scene is so utterly crucial, and it bugs me so much that didn't end up being in the final cut. Now, again, James Cameron in 1985, when he's probably editing this before it comes out in 86, he doesn't have the power that he has in 2023. And he says, I'm going to make a 3-hour Avatar, and you're going to fucking like it. And Disney's like, yes, sir, I'll take some more. In those days, he didn't have that power. So they're like, you got to cut this. You got to get down to 2 hours. It's got to be 2 hours and 5 minutes. It can't be over that. So he has to cut some of these scenes out. And that is one of the scenes. That scene where Ripley discovers that her daughter lived and died during that 57 years she was stuck in space, all thanks to this alien and this corporation, that so informs her relationship with Newt. You better understand why she's so protective of Newt, because she lost her own daughter. So that's part one that, again, very...
And before we move on from that, there's another very important reason. And to me, this is the most important scene that should have stayed in the movie. Another important reason, it gives her no reason to go back to Earth, because in that scene, there's a small line where Burke says she had no kids. She died at 67. She had no kids. Ripley has no one to go home to. No one. That would inform her decisions later, because that really is the biggest plot hole of the whole movie, is why the fuck would she say yes to this? Even with Burke and his charmingness and he's very understanding of her in the beginning, she'd still be like, have a good time, Burke. Hope you all fucking die. I'm going back to see my grandkids. Like she could have done that, but she had nothing to go home to. So all she had to do was fight. And I just wanted to point that out, because those two things, her relationship with Newt and the reason she, for whatever reason, decided to go with them, is important in that scene specifically. Please continue.
Absolutely. So now, from there, I'll hit the major parts. There are little minor, like the investigation, the interrogation scene goes a little longer. You know, there's a little bit more dialogue in there, things like that. But for the biggest part, most of the special edition stuff then takes place on LV-426 once they land. Again, few lines here and there, even when they introduce the Marines, where they're on the drop ship, things like that, a few extra lines here and there. That great scene where Hudson is saying, ready to get it on, you know it, and then he basically says, hey Ripley, you got nothing to worry about. Me and my group of ultimate badasses are here to protect you. We got state-of-the-art firepower. We got electronic ball busters. Like, he goes to this whole speech basically like talking about how badass they are, which comes back to haunt them in a big way about 10 minutes later. But that's a great scene. But one of the biggest scenes that they do, which I don't know why this was the one that stood out in my head the most. They had these remote sentries, which were like these mechanical guns that they could set up somewhere that if they detected movement, they would fire. And so they had these remote sentries. They had 4 of them. They set them up in the corridors where the aliens were most likely to try to get into their building. Now, we know from the film that actually the theatrical version, they close off the corridors, they seal it up, all this kind of little things they do to try to protect themselves from the aliens getting in. But there's one key thing that gets left out, and it's these sentry guards. And there's these brilliant scenes where the aliens do try to get in, and the guns go off, and it's just wall-to-wall shooting, and you don't really see anything. You just see these guns firing, smoke everywhere, and you see Hicks, Ripley, Hudson intently watching this video monitor, and you hear screaming of the aliens, you hear the screaming of the aliens, and they're all in there. The guns get done, and then the one side gets wiped out. The other side, the other corridor, they get down to where there's like one gun has like 15 rounds left, but it stops, meaning the movement has stopped, which means the aliens have stopped. Once again, talking about the intelligence of these aliens, they say it stopped them because they're all getting ready to gear up and like go fight because they think the aliens are going to be on their front door in 2 seconds. When the final gun stops firing 15 shots short of the exhaustion of the ammunition, Ripley says, "Oh no, hold on, it stopped them." And they're like, "Oh wow, it did. They stopped coming. They realized." And then Ripley says a great line where she says, "Until they figure another way in." She knows that these are intelligent beings. They may be animals, they may be killers, they may be savages, but they are smart. They're going to figure this out. Another speech that happens, it's almost a praise of the killer speech, which I love, which is something I learned from you, Patrick. They're trying to figure out the hierarchy. They're trying to figure out the aliens. And they say, because there's a line that stays in the movie where Ripley says, there's got to be, there's like 150 colonists, all these eggs. Where are these eggs coming from? And she says, it's something we must not have seen yet. There's a scene in the special edition where Hudson actually proposes, maybe this is like an ant colony or a bee colony where there's a queen and she's a big mother and she's the one commanding everything and she's the one laying the eggs. Now, I know that is pretty on point when we actually do meet the alien queen. But I love that dissection when you think about it because that's really what these are. They are bees. They are ants. They all form around a queen. That little speech I loved when Hudson kind of figures it out. He's like, I wonder if that's what they are. They're a hierarchy like an ant colony or a beehive. Because that's what they are. They are ultimately that. And if you ever have seen any study on bees are very smart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're very smart and very, very protective of the queen, like things like that. So these little things that added in. So that was another major part was that. But one thing I kind of skipped over and I want to mention, another major part that you talked about a little bit earlier. We actually go to LV-426 before the soldiers land there. It's a great scene where we're actually in the platform and one of the scientists comes over to his boss and says, hey, I just got an order from the company, Weyland-Yutani, to go search for this spaceship. And there's this terraformer we sent out there to look for it, and now he's saying they found it. And he wants to know if his claim will be honored. Much like Brett and Parker in the original Alien when they're like, we want our full shares. All about profit and greed in this world.
Mm-hmm.
They call back in and say, we found the ship. Will our claim be honored? And they say, I don't see why not. And I'm not going to tell them otherwise because what's the answer I always get when I ask? Don't ask.
Yeah.
We go out to the colony. That's where we see the alien ship. That's where we meet this husband and wife pair. They're terraformers along with their children, one of which is Rebecca. Nobody calls her Rebecca. Everyone calls her Newt. And they find them and they go in there and that's when they come back out and it's Newt's father who is the first person infected and attacked by the facehugger. That's another key scene that gets cut out. We don't see that in the regular version. But I think it adds so much more to the film, especially getting to meet Newt under those circumstances, not when she's basically fighting to survive, living in the air ducts in the colony. Which also another real quick explanation that they didn't mention in the movie or the special edition, but Carrie Hinn, I believe was her name, who played Newt. Yeah. She actually explained that in the story, in the script. Newt got her nickname because they used to play a game. The children on LV-426 played a game where they would crawl around the air duct system and basically play a game of hide and seek. And she was the best at it. That's why she got the nickname Newt, because she could crawl through all these little spaces and she was the best at this game. So when Newt rescues the surviving Marines and Ripley and gets her into the air duct to escape the attack from the aliens, the reason she knows where she's going and what she's doing is because this is a game she's played her entire life, living on LV-426. She knows these air ducts. That's a little detail that was kind of something that didn't get mentioned. Did I miss any of the major parts of the special edition? I think I got pretty much everything.
Yeah, no, I think you did. And I think it is still a testament. Like I think about now, James Cameron's Avatar series. Have you watched the Avatar movies? Yeah.
I have. I'm not as into them as a lot of people are, though.
I'm not either.
I've seen the other. I think I've seen both movies one time total.
Yeah, I've only ever like really absorbed them on the big screen because they are truly big screen experiences. But I digress. But the point to all that is that James Cameron's a great world builder, and was his 2.5 hour definitive version of Aliens. But I'm going to say something pretty controversial here, Damon. I'm going against the genius himself, James Cameron. I don't believe that most of these scenes add to the experience of Aliens. I've watched Aliens and you've watched Aliens at least 100 times. I'm saying minimum 100 times. The only scene that I truly felt needed to be in there was the scene with the reveal that she had a daughter and that daughter had no children. That's the scene that actually really made a whole lot of sense and completely evaporates the plot hole of her going to LV-426, which makes no sense in the theatrical version. So that scene is critical. However, the fit and finish of that scene is not a James Cameron level scene. Like the little simulation room is clearly like a projector and a couple of potted plants and like a park bench. Like it doesn't look, it's not a great looking scene, and it doesn't match the fit and finish of the rest of the movie, but the story part of it is very critical. So I think that should have stayed in. The scene where they go to LV-426, it's a little over long. It's a little over technical, which, by the way, the Avatar movies, they suffer from that a little bit. And yes, it does show what's going on. It shows that they got a call back from, like, the story part of it makes sense. But did it add to the experience of Aliens for me? It didn't. The Sentry scene, I know you like it. I know it makes sense. I think it slowed everything down. That's my personal opinion. Most of these deleted scenes to me didn't make this movie better. They made it more, how can I put it? Calm down here, Damon. Let's not get into this, but Batman versus Superman's Ultimate Edition, it's just 30 more minutes. It's the same movie. It's just 30 more minutes to make all the little things a little bit clearer. That's to me what James Cameron's director's cut of Aliens is. It just makes everything just a little bit more clear. But it didn't add to the experience, and nothing fixed anything. Nothing. I was like, ooh, if that was in, it would be better. I never felt that, except for the kid part, or that Ripley had a kid. But even that, I was sort of like, dang, I didn't want to know that Ripley had a life before. Like, I was sort of holding on to Alien, but I saw how critical it was. I saw how important it was. Outside of that scene, the rest of those scenes, I like them. I didn't need them for the Alien experience. That's my honest opinion. They still very much add to the story. Like, it's James Cameron. They're airtight. They matter, but they didn't make the experience. Like, now I can't not watch it without the director's cut. That's not how I felt. I just felt like, okay, I see it's clearer now. Got it. But I love the ride of the original theatrical version.
While I do prefer the special edition, just because that always reminds me of the first time I saw Alien, the only two scenes that I really feel are crucial is when she finds out she has a daughter, which, as you said, informs her decision to go back, but I think it also informs her need to save Newt.
Yes.
So, yes, I understand. Like, you don't necessarily need that, because at that point, Newt almost becomes the avatar for the Nostromo crew. She couldn't save anybody on her crew.
Right.
She's going to save one person. But I think informing the fact that she lost her daughter really does tell you why she's so emphatic about saving Newt. I think those two things put together, I think that scene does add that element. Yeah. And I like the robot sentry scene just because it adds one extra little set piece, one little extra added action scene. It's just a cool little detail. And again, I think it also, once again, speaks to the intelligence of the aliens. Does it make a major difference in the film? No. Does it, are you missing anything by it not being there? No, but I still enjoy, I don't know, just a cool little different effect that in the robot sentries that were firing guns in a hallway. And I love the little ways that James Cameron cheated to basically show smoke and mirrors, but not actually show you anything, but you still know exactly what's happening. I love that. So, again, I agree. Most of it, even the LV-426 with Newt and her parents, that doesn't even need to be in there, because then you really do get the hint that something's going on behind the scenes.
It's almost too much of a tell, yeah.
But I think the scene with her daughter and the robot sentries, very selfishly, I just like that scene. Those two scenes are really the ones that make the difference for me. And that's why I say I do like the special edition. And again, I fully admit I'm probably saying that partially because it was the first version I ever saw. So when I saw the actual theatrical version, whatever it was, a year later or 2 years later, whenever it was when I was a kid, I was like, hold on, where's the robot sentry scene? Where's the scene about her daughter? And then, come to find out it was never in the original version. But yeah, again, minor details, and I like those two scenes in particular. Really, the one with her daughter is the one that I think would have made a difference in this movie specifically because of those two things. You know why she's going back to LV-426, and you know why she's so desperate to save Newt. I think those two things would have been better enhanced in this movie had that scene been in there. But does it make that much of a difference ultimately? Not really. It's an incredible film from start to finish, whether you watch the special edition or the regular theatrical version.
It's funny, both director's cuts, Alien and Aliens, they kind of had the same thing. I go, yeah, it didn't actually make a difference for my experience of the movie. There's just one little extra scene that would have been interesting in the original. It's funny how they both mirror themselves that way. I think we need to sit James Cameron and Ridley Scott down at a table and hash this beef out. like you guys are much closer than you think, and just see what kind of argument that turns into. I bet it's not going to sound anything like his conversation with Greta Gerwig, I bet.
Yeah. So real quick, before we get to categories, I want to go over one more thing that I want to mention to you, Patrick, because I watched the full commentary from 2003, and it was James Cameron, Gail Ann Hurd, who was the executive producer. It was his wife at the time. She was his wife, but also a producer on the film. Bill Paxton, Michael Biehn, Jeanette Goldstein, who plays Vasquez, Lance Henriksen, who plays Bishop, and then a lot of the visual effects people and Stan Winston's teams were also on the commentary. So it kind of bounces around a lot. But I took some notes of some of the things I learned watching the commentary track, and I wanted to share these with you and get your reaction. So I'll kind of go down the list, and then we'll talk about them here.
Love it.
Probably the thing I learned most that I had zero idea about going into this, which I texted you about during while I was watching this. James Cameron was talking about when he learned how to shoot, make things bigger than what they were. A lot of that education came from when he worked with John Carpenter. Now, I had no idea what the fuck soever that he ever worked with John Carpenter. It turns out James Cameron was the director of photography on Escape from New York. I had no idea. I had never heard that before in my entire life, and I looked it up. Sure enough, it's on his IMDb page. He was the director of photography on Escape from New York. Talk about a wild connection to a horror icon. He used to work for John Carpenter. That's so wild. So I talked about how this was never meant to be really a horror film, but there's horror elements, and James Cameron actually said in the commentary he didn't want this to be as much of a horror, but he injected those elements because he wanted to stay true to the original film. So while you do not see that, you do get some horror elements. I have no idea. I've seen Aliens, as you said, 100 times. No idea why I never knew this before. And you're going to laugh at me. You probably knew that. I'm sure you knew this, but I had no idea. Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Actress.
I didn't know that.
For Aliens. Yes.
It's amazing.
It was the year Marlee Matlin won. Marlee Matlin won, so she was in the category Marlee Matlin. But yeah, Sigourney Weaver got nominated for Best Actress for Aliens. I had no idea.
No idea.
Yeah. The scene where the Marines first encounter the alien warriors when they go in there with the motion detectors and they're down in sub-level 3, James Cameron said that scene was informed and inspired by Dallas crawling through the ship and running into the creature in his face. That's where he got that inspiration. In 1986, they never did a test screening for Aliens.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much.
That's unheard of by today's standards.
Yeah.
So much of filmmaking is done by the whole test screening process. Never did one for this film. But he said when they did open on opening weekend and they sat in the theater, the moment that the whole crowd went absolutely bonkers, ape shit nuts, was the end when Ripley attacks the alien in the loader suit. They said people
it's incredible.
With their minds. Sigourney Weaver had 3 notes when she came back and she told James Cameron, these are the 3 things I want in this movie. None of them happened, but this is what she wanted. This is what Sigourney Weaver wanted. She wanted to die. She didn't want to survive this one. She didn't want to use any guns at all. Sigourney Weaver is a massive liberal. She didn't want to use any guns. And here's the one that you'll laugh at because of what we talked about with Alien. She wanted to have sex with the alien.
Oh, yeah. See, she was in the spirit of the original script. Wow, what a fucking note that is.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
James Cameron said, well, we'll take a look at that, and then none of them happened.
He went, here's my notes. Okay, toss that. We're not doing any of the things she just said. And I'm sure that's why she's not on the director's commentary. She probably is like, fuck that guy. He didn't take any of my notes.
Yeah.
Sex with the alien. Jesus, Sigourney.
Yeah,
it makes me love her more, by the way.
Yeah. So now the scene in one of the final scenes in the air ducts when they're trying to escape and Vasquez gets trapped by the alien and Gorman comes back and saves her and then they blow up together with the grenade. The scene where Vasquez shoots the alien and then traps the alien with her boot and fires the handgun, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
So Jeanette Goldstein, who played Vasquez, she learned how to use the big giant gun. She learned how to use the smaller gun, but she just could not handle a handgun. She just couldn't do it for whatever reason. So when you see the handgun in the foot and the firing, that's actually Gail Ann Hurd.
No shit.
Producer, obviously James Cameron's wife, she was familiar with handguns, and so she went in and did that scene. So when you see the hand, the gun, and the foot pressing the alien against the wall, and she fires the gun a bunch of times, that's actually Gail Ann Hurd. That's not Jeanette Goldstein.
That's amazing.
One other note, this was not filmed, but it was in the script, or it was filmed but didn't end up in the special edition. So remember in Alien, the big extra scene in Alien is that Ripley actually finds Dallas and Brett, and they're all gooed up on the wall, cocooned, and getting ready to be infected by more aliens. That's the theory, right? And we said that while it didn't make a big difference in the film, it was a cool scene. They just decided not to add it. It got added in the director's cut. In the original version of the film, which again isn't in the special edition, so this scene is out there somewhere, Ripley actually runs into Burke while she's looking for Newt on the way out. Newt's been taken by the alien. She goes back down to sublevel 3. She runs into Burke, and he's now trapped on the wall. And he's basically like, I fucked up. This is all my fault, blah, blah, blah. And rather than just letting him suffer and die, she hands him a grenade. And once she and Newt, so one of the explosions that you see when she throws the belt of grenades in there and the alien queen escapes and all that kind of stuff, one of those explosions was actually Burke blowing himself up.
Oh, that would have been nice.
Yeah, so that was the other wrinkle on there. And as we mentioned, $18.5 million budget, 65 days they shot this film, and it was done on Pinewood Studios, which is a very, very, very famous studio in London, England. One other note I want to mention from the commentary, which I actually knew about this from the Movies That Made Us. So filmmaking at that time in England was much, much different. They had to use a British crew, and there was a big problem with the American cast because under British filmmaking rules, they had to use a lot of British actors, and they didn't do that. And so they had to work around that to actually get the cast that they wanted. The first associate director,
yeah.
British guy, yeah. He pushed back on everything that James Cameron said during shooting because James Cameron's this young kid, only directed Piranha 2. He's like, fuck this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. So at one point, things got so bad that the assistant director basically raised a coup. He wanted to just throw James Cameron off the film and take over. And the entire cast rallied around James Cameron and basically said, fuck this guy. And James Cameron ended up firing him. He got fired. The first assistant director got fired. And they said at that moment, the entire cast came together as a family. And that's what got them through the second half of filming. Because part of the complaints were they were filming 14-hour days. And in England, They weren't used to that. They did much shorter shooting days. They weren't used to doing 12 and 14-hour shooting days. The schedule was wild and all these kind of things. And they were not used to that. And at one point, the assistant director's like, I'm starting a revolution. We're taking over this film. Fuck this guy, James Cameron. But instead, the entire crew is like, no, fuck you. We love James Cameron. and they all rallied around him, and that guy got fired. And that is the story of that. One other thing I want to mention before we get into categories, a couple casting notes I want to mention in this movie. Did you know that Michael Biehn was not the original Hicks?
I did know that. That I did know. Yeah, from Movies That Made Us, that it was an English guy, right?
No, it was James Remar.
Oh, that's right, James Remar. Yeah.
Who you may know, he's an actor from, he was in 48 Hours with Eddie Murphy. That's a film. He was in Dexter. He was Dexter's dad in Dexter. He is also in Django Unchained. He plays a couple characters in Django Unchained. He plays the bounty hunter at the beginning of the movie, and then he plays he plays Butch, the main gunman working for Calvin Candy in Django Unchained. Great character actor, been around forever. He got hired to play Hicks. He got booted because he got busted with drugs, and they're like, all right, you got to go. Michael Biehn, who was working with James Cameron on Terminator, got brought in as a replacement. That was one of the big casting differences in that film. They actually had filmed scenes with James Remar, and they had to do it with Michael Biehn. The other thing was, Bill Paxton, the way he got his role was he had done Terminator, if you remember. He's a very small, very, very small role in Terminator as one of the punks that Arnold Schwarzenegger attacks early in the movie to get clothes. He ran into James Cameron before filming, and he just kind of runs in. He's like, hey, man, what's going on? How are you? So you got something for me? And just joking. And James Cameron's like, you know what? I might actually have something for you. Yeah. And that's how he got the part of Hudson. Totally just ran into him accidentally in Los Angeles one day. And it's like, what do you got for me? Just joking. And James Cameron's like, you know what? I do have something for you. There's this character named Hudson.
And James and Bill Paxton had a long history because when they were working for Roger Corman, Bill Paxton was one of his. James Cameron was a production designer for Roger Corman. Bill Paxton would come in and help paint, help build sets. He was just a handy guy. He was a guy who knew how to do stuff. He wanted to be an actor in the business, but he was just doing other work as most people do. And so they developed a rapport, and he liked Bill Paxton for sort of his blue collar work ethic because he was a guy that was willing to work, and he was also obsessed with movies. So they became friends. So when they bumped into each other on the street, it wasn't just like, oh, that one guy I worked with one time. Like, he knew Bill pretty well, and obviously he knew what Bill could do from Terminator. He's like, I think this guy's going to be great for the role of Hudson.
And the studio pushed back, but the reason they ultimately relented was because Bill had made an impression doing weird science of all things.
Yeah.
He was like, all right, we can kind of see this guy in the role. So there was actually pushback because, again, this isn't James Cameron with Avatar. This is James Cameron with one film under his belt, and no one had seen Terminator at this point. So they're like, what are we going to trust this guy for? And he got his way, and this is the movie we got as a result.
It's incredible, man. What a convergence of a bunch of great decisions finally making it to screen and making this movie just like one of the most fun movies you'll ever watch.
As I said, this is our podcast, and we hope to inform you a lot with our details that we're giving you, but I can't stress enough, in all seriousness, go watch that episode of The Movies That Made Us, because it's a really fun episode, and it told me so much I didn't know about the making of Aliens. You know what I mean? So much about this movie I had no idea had happened with how this movie came together and how it was like a lot of forces working against it, yet somehow James Cameron and crew overcame it and ended up making what I am saying, in my opinion, is the greatest science fiction film ever made. Wild when you think about all the things they had going against them.
Yeah, it's a miracle movies get made. And a movie like this, oh my God, like it's from top to bottom. You can't believe a movie got made and ended up being this good.
Yeah, so let's get into our categories. We got a lot to get to with categories because this is, again, one of my favorite movies of all time, so we're really going to dig deep on this one. Let's kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show, and let's talk about best performance. So, Patrick, for Aliens, who do you have for best performance?
Oh, Damon, you already know. Sigourney Weaver strikes again as Ellen Ripley. I mean, I did not know she was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars for Aliens. That's awesome. It's such a crazy thing because we think of Aliens as sort of like the ultimate genre movie. It blends sci-fi and horror and action and all this stuff. Like, that's not typically how the Oscars skew themselves. They go for more drama roles. So I love that. I also love that, Ripley's performance is very different in this movie than it is in Alien. I noticed the tonal shift in the performances overall is a little more bombastic, a little bit more over the top. I think that's a James Cameron touch because the original has a very realistic feel to it. It feels like real people doing real things. This is almost like dramatic. This is dramatic. This is like a little bit more painted, bigger, badder, because it needs to be, because it's a bigger, badder movie in that respect. So all the performances are a little more heightened. And listen, Sigourney Weaver, action star. Sigourney Weaver, lead star. She can just do those things. She can carry this movie. You run into the fire with her because you believe her character can do it. It's great.
Yeah, her performance is off the charts. And again, I know this is not me trying to like knock one movie or raise up another one, but this is just a much different performance than what she gave in Alien. And that's why I think I prefer this particular performance, because she does lead. Like, she does feel a bit of an ensemble in the original Alien. Now, of course, she is the lone survivor. She takes over, but you do spend a lot of the movie not really knowing necessarily that Ripley's the lead. You know what I mean? She's not the captain of the ship. She's not the one who goes down on the surface. A lot of the, it is very much an ensemble cast in Alien until the crew members start getting wiped out and you realize that she is the focus. And again, we mentioned during Alien, she was a new actress at that point. She had one role under her belt, so they weren't fully trusting in her to lead this film. They had other more experienced people on there, and so she kind of took over at the end. Aliens is a Sigourney Weaver movie. It's her movie. She is the star. She is the lead. She is the ass kicker. And she shines. And I love that she got nominated for an Oscar. Do I wish she would have won it? Of course I do.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible. But the fact that she even got nominated, when I heard that, I was like, really? And I had to look it up. And I was like, oh my God, she did. How did I not know this? Yeah, incredible. Unbelievable performance. Now, Patrick, I could easily just say that, she's the best performance because, she's the lead. She got nominated for a freaking Oscar, of course.
Yeah.
But I have to go another route.
Okay.
One of my all-time favorite actors in this movie. I don't know if I put a number on it necessarily, but it definitely top 10. Like I just love everything he's done, and I adore him in this movie. And that is the late, great Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
One of my greatest moments in life, and I've told this on story on the podcast before, but I have to tell it again right now. A few years ago, in 2016, San Diego Comic-Con did a 30-year anniversary panel for Aliens. They got the whole cast back together for the first time. In 2016, Sigourney Weaver was there. Michael Biehn was there. Lance Hendrickson, everybody. I got to go. Very excited. One of my coolest panels I've been to in all the Comic-Con years I've gone. But I also, at that point, was working for Fox. That was my job. And if you know, 20th Century Fox produced the Alien movies. So they were in charge of this panel. So that night, or Saturday night, I guess it was Saturday night, I got to go to a Fox party on top of a rooftop in San Diego. Felt very special going to this party. I had no business being there with all the celebrities that were there. Bill Paxton was there having a drink. He's just standing by a table having a drink. And I was like, you know what? I will never forgive myself if I don't go up and just tell Bill Paxton how much I love him and adore his career and adore everything he's ever done. And so I did. I walked over and I said, Mr. Paxton, my name is Damon Martin. I'm a journalist. I'm here covering the event. Don't want to bother you. I'm sorry to bother you, but I just want to say I'm such a massive fan of your career. I love everything that you've done. Aliens is one of my favorite movies, and the fact that I got to see you all on stage today means the absolute world to me. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate everything you've done. I just want to say thank you for that. Could not have been nicer. Could not have been kinder. Shook my hand, said thank you so much. I really appreciate the kind words. Asked me about myself. We chatted for about 5 minutes, and I said again, so sorry I didn't want to bother you. I appreciate you at the time. He's like, no problem. Have a great night. Great meeting you. Thank you so much for the kind words. Something to that effect. Walked away, and I was on cloud 9. Sadly, a couple years later, Bill Paxton left us. He passed away. And one of the moments that I always will remember, and I'm so happy that I decided to take that chance, was walking up to Bill Paxton and just saying how much I appreciated him. Obviously I had no idea he was going to pass away, and it's a sad thing that he's gone because he was so good and so young. but I'm so happy that I had that moment to express how much an actor meant to me, because his role as Wayne Hudson, by the way, if you want to get the full name in there, Hudson is the comic relief. He is very much the comic relief of this movie, but he is so good and he is so over the top that it is brilliant. Everything he does in this movie is brilliant. From the opening where he has this outlandish, you can tell he's the class clown of the Marines, to his braggadocious confidence on the way down to the surface, and then he is the human panic button in this movie, man. He freaks out and absolutely just goes into full on panic mode like 8 different times once the aliens attack. And his ending, which to this day I'm sad that he died in this movie, but in the end, he doesn't bow away, he doesn't cower away, he doesn't run away. He gets attacked, and he just continues to fire his machine gun down at the aliens and basically says, "Fuck you" on the way out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill Paxton, for one of the most iconic performances in science fiction history.
Yeah, when I found out that Bill Paxton died, for the actors that really make an impact on me, I do give them a post on my regular Instagram. It sounds silly, but I'm obsessed with movies, right? So when I give them that post, it means like, you meant a lot to me, so you're immortalized on this social media page that nobody's gonna go to anyway. And I posted the picture of him on the dropship, because it's such a memorable performance. It's so much fun. I think every kid that watches it is like, oh, I want to be like Hudson. Like, I want to be a cut up and fun and also a badass all on top of it. He could give you all of it there. And it's really important to the movie that it has that levity in it, and it's all on his shoulders, and he does it so well.
He's such a good actor, man. He's so missed. He was
Yeah.
getting everything. Like, I know we're talking about aliens, but just go down the list. I mean, every movie he was ever in, he just brought something to it.
And we talked about Frailty on this podcast, and which is what movie that he directed, which is fantastic. It's a really, really good movie. It's like really, really like a prestige level movie, and he directed it. And if you haven't seen Frailty, go see that, because it's genius.
And Near Dark. We talked about Near Dark. What a brilliant performance
Yeah.
that was as well. Another horror film he did. So, yeah, Bill Paxton was just an icon. And like I said, sad he's gone, but man, are we lucky to have had him in this kind of performance. So, there you go. Our next category, Patrick, we're going to talk about, instead of favorite character, we're going to talk about the MVP of this movie, the most valuable player of Aliens. This is a little bit different category than just picking out favorite characters. We're doing favorite character. I'm picking Hudson every single time.
Sure.
I love Hudson. But, Patrick, who is your MVP for Alien and why?
Damon, the MVP is here to stay. So on future episodes, if MVP will replace favorite character, so you could always pick the character if you want to, but on some movies it's harder because there's less characters to choose from, and maybe the MVP was like a cinematographer, or maybe the MVP was the writer, or maybe the MVP was the director, et cetera, et cetera. But in this case, the MVP for me is still one of the characters, because this is a great character-driven piece, and this time around, I had to give it to Newt. Because indeed, the most valuable player was Newt. She knew the lay of the land. All these badass Marines, and even Ripley, who had experience facing down an alien in the past, were still lost on this colony. They still didn't really know how to navigate this place, and the aliens had everything locked down, except for one thing. They didn't have Newt locked down, because she knew how to get through the air ducts. She knew her way around the entire colony, and without Newt, this crew would have been done for. Just this little girl was able to keep these people alive with her knowledge and her ability to escape the aliens. So for me, I had to give my MVP this year, this podcast, to Newt.
Newt is actually a pretty great character in the way that she reacts and actually works her way through this film. And as I said, that little detail that Carrie Henn mentioned in the commentary track, where she said that like her nickname Newt came from the idea that she crawled around these areas, which was another little cookie, little nugget they relayed in the commentary, where they said, just so you understand, air ducts are not like this. They're not big at all. They're not made for people to crawl around in. But we were betting on the fact that the movie going audience had no idea what air ducts actually looked like. The air ducts and aliens, you can have a full-size human adult crawling around in them, which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, she's the survivor. Like, she
Yeah.
survived however many months of once her colony got wiped out, she survived. And once these Marines show up, she's still the survivor. Even when they first capture her, and she's like, is that good enough? Can I go now? Like, she knows they're doomed. She knows they're fucked. And
Yeah.
she's ultimately the one that saves them. So yeah, she's a great character. And also Carrie Hinn, who got this role through an audition. She was in school in London, got this role, totally new actor, never done anything before, and never did anything after. She never did another role. This was her one role, was Newt. Unbelievable. Unbelievable about that.
Iconic role too. Like, everyone knows Newt.
Yeah. So my MVP, I originally was going to go character driven, and I was going to say Bishop, but I already kind of explained Bishop earlier in the podcast when I talked about how he was ultimately the best guy in this entire thing, and we just didn't know that until he basically gets ripped apart by the Queen Alien. So I'm going to go the cupcake route here, Patrick, and I'm just going to be honest about this and say my MVP of Aliens is James Cameron. But not just because he made the greatest science fiction movie of all time, but I want to applaud James Cameron, the screenwriter. Because when you think about the creativity to go into a world, an Oscar-winning world, remember, Alien did take home an Oscar for visual effects, and a film that was beloved. It became a cult icon film. Alien was massive. To go in there and brave to take this on and create a completely different style of story. Everything in this movie, written-wise, in terms of screenplay, is just utter brilliance. But what I love most about Aliens, beyond the story, which is great and stellar, and as I said, this is a perfect movie, the dialogue is so good in this film. And that's all James Cameron. He did this by himself. When you hear, we got to grease this rat fuck son of a bitch right now. When you hear, get away from her, you bitch. When you hear, we're on an express elevator to hell, going down. That's James Cameron.
Yeah.
All James Cameron. That, to me, when we did Alien, and I love Alien. I keep saying, I always feel like I'm justifying myself when I say that. I love Alien. But one thing Alien doesn't have is, like, there's not tremendous dialogue in that movie. We kind of struggled a little bit to get best line. You ended up picking the Ash line, which was the Praise the Killer line, which was the best line. I even said that in our podcast. But that wasn't a super dialogue-heavy movie. Aliens is made by the dialogue. You know the quotes from this movie. I could quote this movie left, right, and center.
We're about to.
We're about to, and I could have picked 20 different quotes in this movie and said that's my favorite quote. I quote this movie constantly. The dialogue in this movie is so good.
James Cameron on the subject of dialogue, he knows when to put the great line and marry it with what's about to be a great scene, right? Express elevator to hell, going down, and then boom, and then the drop ship to it. He's marrying the dialogue and the action. It's incredible. Like that's the kind of stuff that's going to actually make a difference. The transitions from scene to scene. A character will say something, it will literally carry you into a new scene, and it matters for what the new scene is going to be. That's attention to detail. On top of all of that, he gets to choose the production designer. The production design on this movie is fantastic. It feels like a very lived-in world, very reminiscent texturally of Alien, but all its own, all its new style language. He chose Stan Winston. He believed in what Stan Winston could do, and boy, did Stan Winston deliver. We're going to get into that too. You could have argued MVP was Stan Winston on this easily for the design of his aliens, but he made that choice to bring that guy in. He chose the cast, and believe me when I tell you, James Cameron pores over who the right characters are. If he didn't think Sigourney Weaver was right, he would have picked somebody else. He just knew she was right. He would have gone, well, we're not using Ripley, and we're going to do something else, or we're going to find another way to make Ripley look different because whatever. Like, every little thing, believe me, James Cameron is combing over every single detail of this movie. And why it hits why every single thing seems to keep pulling you to the next thing is because of the decisions he makes. So that's why I'll always show up for James Cameron movies. Even the movies I don't like Titanic, I don't really like that movie, but I can recognize what it can do. It's still a special thing because of his attention to detail.
And let's not forget, James Cameron also made the definitive Aquaman movie. We can't ever forget his Aquaman.
That's right.
From Entourage. Remember? He got Aquaman.
That's right.
James Gunn.
By the way, I would watch the fuck out of an Aquaman movie. Like, James Gunn is now the head of DC. He'd be crazy to not go, hey, James, you want to do a new Aquaman reboot? Like, I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, starring Vinny Chase. Come on now. All right, let's talk about best quote, best line.
Yeah.
There's a dozen of them. Easy, 2 dozen of them. I could just
let's just read the dialogue from the script. I'll be Ripley, you'll be Burke.
Yeah, let's just
go down the line, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. So you have 2 quotes I pulled for you.
Thank you.
I'll go in sequential order so you know which way they're coming here.
Thank you so much.
Set yours up, and then I'll go through the other 6 I pulled. Not the 6 so there's 8 quotes total, to be fair to everyone. They're like, holy shit, how many did you pull? I pulled 2 specifically for you. The other 6, there's a couple that are favorites of mine, but the other lines I pulled were just iconic lines I had to pull. They weren't necessarily my favorite lines. They're just lines that I just loved. So set up your 2 lines, and then we'll move on from there.
Damon, we talked a little bit about my sweet little dedication to actors when they pass away in my Instagram. You know, another actor that got an Instagram dedication from me, Sergeant Apone, who I have loved since I was a child. And I think what's so important about Sergeant Apone in this movie is he pumps not just the troops up, because that's his job. Sergeant is supposed to lead these guys, get them pumped up and ready to fucking rock and roll. He's pumping up the audience. He's letting them know you're about to deal with some bad motherfuckers. So you need the right character with the right delivery to make this work. So these 2 lines, they live rent-free in my head forever. And by the way, I'm not alone. When I met Jordan Peele and he and I bonded over horror movies, this is before he was ever a director of amazing horror films. He spit these lines back at me because we were bonding over Apone and how great Apone was. He know, and we all trust Jordan Peele's taste. These lines, not just me, they don't just impress me, they impress one of the best horror directors around right now. I present to you some of the best lines from Sergeant Apone.
Played by the great Al Matthews, just to give him a name.
Yes, thank you, Al Matthews.
Played by the great Al Matthews.
All right, sweethearts, you heard the man and you know the drill. Assholes and elbows. Hudson, come here. Come here.
We're a team, and there's nothing to worry about. We come here, and we're going to conquer, and we're going to take some. Is that understood? Yes, sir. That's what we're going to do, sweetheart. We are going to go and get some. All right, people, on the ready line. Are you me? Yeah! Are you me? Yeah! Where are you? Where are you? Hudson! Get on the ready line, Marine. Get some to die. Get on the ready line. Yo! Move it up, goddammit. Get hot. 1, 2, 3, oh, get on, get on, get on. Move it up, move it up, move it up. Move it up, move it up, move it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9. Absolutely badasses. Let's pack them in. Get in there.
That's so good. By the way, when he goes, Hudson, come here, come here. That is exactly how I talk to my kids. I'm like, oh, that's what it is. That's a natural dad reaction when your kids are being little shits. Come here.
I almost pulled a 3rd line from the very opening when he gets out of the sleep pod and he said, every day in the Marine Corps is like a day on the farm. Every paycheck a fortune, every formation a parade. I love the Corps. I love to put that one in there as well. Apone is great. Al Matthews is so good in this movie, man. He's such a great, and yeah, if you can't listen to that last speech when he says, get on the radio line, Marine, are you Marine? Like, if you don't get up and get excited when he says that, dude, you're not human inside, because that just gets me.
Yeah, pumps you up.
Yeah. So now let me just get into the best of Hudson to start with here. Bill Paxton, as I already said, is my favorite character in this movie, Wayne Hudson. Bill Paxton is my favorite performance in this movie. So let me just get to you some of the lines from the great Bill Paxton in this movie. We're going to kick things off with the teaser I've had a couple times in this movie, which is when they first get on the ship and they're about to drop down to the planet.
5.
We're on express elevator to hell. Going down.
2.
Iconic, right
So
there.
good.
All right. Now, the line that I know personally that Patrick quotes often, as he's told me he quotes this often, which is when they find out that Burke let the alien facehuggers into the room with Ripley and Newt trying to infect them, and he was going to basically jettison the Marines, kill the Marines to tell the story once he landed back on the planet. And this is Hudson's reaction.
I say we grease this rat fuck son of a bitch right now.
So good.
And then my personal favorite line, the line that I quote without fail at least once a week. And my girlfriend always laughs because she knows exactly what I'm going for when I say this. The most iconic line in Aliens, in my opinion.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over. What the fuck are we gonna do now? What are we gonna do?
Game over, man. Game over.
Game over has entered the zeitgeist. Like we all know game over. Even the people who say it and they don't know where it came from. There it is.
All right. Now, I do want to throw in a couple other lines I wanted to mention. Now, I said that Bill Paxton as Hudson is definitely the comic relief, but quietly, the other comic relief in this movie, which kind of bums me out, he was gone, was Private Frost.
Yeah.
He has some great way. Early in the film, I mentioned earlier, when Ripley smacks away the tray of cornbread from Bishop, and he goes, I guess you don't like the cornbread either, which cracks me up. But there's this great line where Gorman tells the Marines that they got to give up their ammo because they can't fire in the alien pit, which gets this reaction from Frost.
She fucking crazy.
What the hell are we supposed to use, man? Harsh language?
I always love that line. He's like, is he fucking crazy? And he goes, what are we supposed to use, man? Harsh language?
Yeah. Frost got done dirty. I'm still mad about how Frost went out. Like they stuffed all the ammunition in his bag. Oh, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Also, just to get off topic, not to get too far off topic, another character I didn't mention that I love his performance in this movie. This is just such a great ensemble. The great Mark Rolston as Private Frost, or Private Drake.
Yeah,
I
Drake.
love him in this movie. Mark Rolston, who you probably know from Shawshank Redemption. He's in Shawshank Redemption. He's also in The Departed, plays one of the main goons working for Costello, being Jack Nicholson's character. Great character actor, been around for many years. He is fantastic as Drake in this movie. I haven't mentioned him at all, but I love Drake. The relationship he shares with Vasquez.
Oh, my God.
He is the ultimate Marine. Like Drake is the ultimate Marine in this movie. Like he is the Marine. So I wanted to
Him and Vasquez together are like the two perfect Marines.
Yeah, I don't have a quote from him, but I love Drake in this movie. So I want to mention that. But yeah, that line about the harsh language. Now, this line might be the most important line in the entire movie when it comes to the power dynamic that we talked about earlier. And this is after Ripley discovers that Burke has basically tried to kill her and Newt by infecting them with the alien. And she has this great line. This is right around the rat fuck son of a bitch line.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them fucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
That's
so
such a
good.
line.
So good. There's another one in there Ripley has where she's like, I'm gonna nail you to the wall, Burke, right to the wall. Like it's so she's like so fucking pissed off at him. Like it's that authenticity that I think Sigourney knows how to bring to her roles, where she's really upset with him. And like in that moment, I'm sure Paul Reiser went off and cried after that because she really gave him shit. It was really good.
Absolutely. And then the final line that I had to bring in here, again, not the line that you and I necessarily picked, but it is undoubtedly the most iconic line from Aliens. And it's like, how could I not play this during this podcast?
Get away from her, you bitch!
So good. And see the punctuation on the end of that. Get away from her, you bitch, and then immediately the hiss, and then we're about to get into some shit. Like brilliant directing, brilliant acting. It all comes together right there. It's so fucking cool.
Yeah. Did you know, this is another thing I learned watching the commentary. I'm sorry to keep going back to the commentary track. Did you know the power loader that Ripley is in is actually super, super lightweight. It's basically like foam core, so it's not metal at all.
Yeah.
But it was actually a giant strongman stunt guy standing behind Sigourney Weaver operating that thing. So she's like, you know how like as a dad, when you're at a wedding and a kid dances on your
Yeah.
feet, you do it? She was literally just standing on this guy's feet and he's behind her moving all the shit.
That is the unsung hero of this movie.
It's like the mountain from Game of Thrones is in there moving all the things and everything, and basically Sigourney Weaver standing on his toes while he's doing all this.
Literally Thor's dad, like like some big giant Icelandic guy going, "Is this good, James? You like this? This is good." More movement with the arms.
Yeah, how wild is that though? That's how they did it, you know? Like,
Movie magic, dude. You make it work.
it's so wild. When I heard that, I was like, "Holy shit, that's wild." All right, let's talk about best effects now. Before I want to start out on a bit of a down note. I'm sorry to say this to you.
Oh, okay, Damon.
We've all talked about how much we love James Cameron, iconic, incredible director. But there's one thing he said talking about this movie, doing my research for this movie. I was like, damn, I almost wish he hadn't said that. I understand this movie is all practical effects. There was no CGI in 1985 when they were filming this, 1984, 1985 when they were filming this. So the aliens are real things. Whether it's, foam rubber, latex, whatever it is, it's real things over and over and over again. He said when he was talking about this, he's like, we had to build every alien, we had to make every costume, we had to do all this, do all that. And he's like, yeah, it'd be so much easier and better in this day and age. You could just do it with CGI. And I was like, no, James.
Yeah, I know.
No.
Ridley's the same way. They're fucking kindred spirits, dude. They're exactly the same like that.
Now, there is good CGI. If you go watch Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, those are great CGI movies. And you couldn't make those movies without CGI, and I totally understand that. But then when I watch movies like The Flash and Aquaman with some of the worst CGI I have ever seen, and I hear James Cameron say it would have just been so much easier just to have CGI aliens, I'm like, no! Yeah. Part of what makes this movie so genuinely great is the practical effects. And I understand you can't do practical effects for everything. I get that. You could not have made a practical effect Thanos in Infinity War. It wouldn't have looked the same. Josh Brolin's like 5'9", I think.
There'd be a strong man behind him moving him around.
Yeah, exactly. But when he said that, I was like, no, I don't want a CGI version of this movie. I love it the way it is. So I was kind of bummed out when he said that. And I get why he said that, but I'm like, no. This movie, the practical effects. So we have the same best effect. Let's just get into it. What is the best effect in Aliens?
Yeah, normally this would be where we talk about best gore or best kill, but truth be told, this is not the goriest movie. It's no gorier than an average action movie. In fact, in some cases, it's less gory than a regular action movie. But the effects in this movie are incredible, of course, done by the great Stan Winston. And of course, it all culminates in meeting the great Queen Mother. Damon, 14 feet tall? What are we talking about here?
Tall, 14 feet tall, all practical. Nothing,
all practical. I look at it and it's still this absolute thing of beauty that they envisioned and achieved the Queen Mother. Every little detail about her, the long egg sac, which very similar to kind of like a termite or an ant sac that she's pumping eggs out through, all the way down to that detail, but just this giant, the biggest version of an alien. You imagine probably the first alien, the alien that came out of Newt's dad, was able to kind of trounce around and grow and get bigger and feed off of colonizers and lay more eggs and create a whole new setup. You see what happens over a year's period of time. What a queen alien, if born and can come to full adulthood, becomes this glorious specimen that is kind of unmatched, Damon. I can't think of another reveal outside of perhaps the T-Rex in Jurassic Park, done by one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, Steven Spielberg, where there's an actual T-Rex on the set. and you're watching it walk in the rain. That's the only other time I can tell you that a creature was designed and just absolutely shocks the audience. When I was a kid, I couldn't even wrap my head around that it was fake. Like, you just kind of believed it because it was so there and so real. And yeah, James, you're wrong. Like, yes, the genius James Cameron is incorrect here. A CG version of the Mother Queen would not be the same. And a few years down the road would not play the same way. This alien queen will always look real because it was real, because it existed in the space. And you never saw a seam. It never looked wrong. It never looked off. It's perfect. It's one of the most perfect creature designs you will ever see in any movie ever.
14 feet tall. The original test to see if they could even do this, because they weren't sure if they could actually build this and make it work, was they built a trash bag.
Yeah, I love the trash bag.
Foam core and wires, and they just surround everything with trash bags, and they put 2 stuntmen inside the Queen Mother to operate the arms and the tail and everything, and they wanted to see if it even work. So again, you can go watch that the movies that made us, and you can see them doing it. There is like a screen test of them working with the trash bag alien queen. It's hilarious. Like, literally everything is just covered up in trash bags, and they test and see if it work. They made it 14 feet tall, 2 stuntmen inside to operate this big thing, along with wires, and wild how they did this. And it looked so good. It looks so good. That final sequence, the battle with Ripley in the loader, when you know the secret sauce of Ripley is Sigourney Weaver standing on a strong man's feet in a loader made of foam core that weighs 30 pounds, and then Sigourney Weaver, and then this giant queen alien, which is 2 stuntmen inside of a costume moving everything with wires and sticks, and you get what happens in Aliens. I'm like, dude, give James Cameron, let him make 18 Avatar movies. I don't care if I like any of them. He's earned the right to do whatever the fuck he wants from now until the end of time. That Queen Mother, and the attention to detail when you first meet her, the heavy breathing. They also specifically changed the way she looked with the teeth. They're translucent. They're not regular teeth. They're translucent, like you can see through them, which is very creepy. The way she kind of ducks down under her helmet.
Yeah.
And you see her. The giant egg sac, which is so gross when you see her birthing the egg sac. You see all the slime and gunk and goo. So gross. And then when Ripley attacks them and you see her fire into the egg sac and all the embiotic fluid goes flying everywhere and she's screaming, you see all the flailing and everything. And a great scene, a great little detail that I learned, again, doing research for this film, which I thought was hilarious. So we talk about the thinking monster, right? Like, we talk about the evolution of the alien, how smart they are. When Ripley escapes and goes up in the elevator and the other elevator comes down and the queen looks at it, and then a minute later we see she comes up in the elevator. Once again, this is an evolved creature. It figured out how to use an elevator. This is not a dumb killing machine. This is a thinking creature. But the funny thing was, the alien was so big that they couldn't actually get it in the elevator. So the scene you see when the alien comes out, they had to put a black curtain behind the alien to cut it off because they couldn't fit it in. So it's actually just an open door in the back where the rest of the alien was, because they couldn't actually fit it in there. So they had to cheat and put a curtain around the back of it. So when she crawls out of there, it looks like she's coming out of the elevator. In reality, the ass end of the Queen Mother was completely out of the other end of the elevator because it wouldn't have fit in there. So they had to cheat to actually get it to show.
My 6-year-old, we're watching it the day before the recording of this podcast, and he goes, "How is the Queen Mother in the elevator? She's too big." And I was like, "Don't ask, just believe." And then when she's kind of creeping out, and it's a great scene, by the way, when the doors open and it's all blackness around her. Like, again, it was just a product of necessity that they had to do that. But her emerging from the blackness of the elevator actually looks creepy as fuck. It looks scary. She's coming out of the shadows, and she looks like she's really crouched down. She looks like she can fold herself to a really compact thing. And I even told my son, I go, you know how like a spider can like be really big and then tighten itself up? I think that's what she's doing. And so like it sells. It sells as this creature finds its way to making sense. I mean, it fits in that little drop ship, again, and then as it emerges from the dropship, you see she's sort of crunched into herself, like she can compact herself. So even though the filmmakers are like, fuck, we're going to have to really fake it to make this make sense, my brain came up with it filled in the process, and it made the alien that much more dynamic and interesting.
Another thing that I love about the Queen in this film is the ending, because it's the great fake out, much like Alien. When Ripley gets out of the ship, she sets the self-destruct, she gets down the escape pod, and you're like, she's going to get away. Everyone's dead, but she's going to get away. And then, oh shit, the alien is on the ship with her. And you're like, oh shit, the alien's going to make it. This one's the same way. You escape LV-426, the whole planet's blowing up, thermonuclear explosion, Bishop saves them, they fly off. Film's over, right? Done. We won. We beat them. And then a little drop of acid comes down, and then boom, the Queen Mother's tail slices through Bishop. And then one of the coolest scenes ever is when she takes her claws and rips him apart, and then goes after Newton. And
so good,
so iconic. And you're just like, oh. And again, it's also very sad, because that's the moment when you're like, we could trust Bishop. We've always been able to trust Bishop. Oh, he's getting ripped in fucking half.
Yeah, but he's an artificial human. He'll be all right. We'll find a way to fix it.
That revelation that she crawls out of the lane.
So good.
Oh God, it's so good. It's just such a shocking moment, because in that, you really think it's over.
When I was a kid, that was my first chest burster moment. Really? Like, it really was. Like, that was the shock to me when I was a kid watching this movie. I go, oh, they did it. They made it out. And thank goodness Bishop helped them. And all of a sudden, like, that little drop of acid, and then boom, big tail spine comes through his chest. I was like, oh, fuck. Like, holy shit. And then he gets ripped in half, which is such a cool effect. I mean, bravo, man. The effects in this movie are they're fucking top shelf, dude. Sorry, James. CG would not have made this better. It's great the way it is. And I know that because what I talked about at the beginning of this podcast, the multiple generations agree. Like, what they saw in this movie, they love. And believe me, they were born in the era of CG, where they see things that are absolutely impossible to film practically. They still think the practical version of Aliens is definitive.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like I said, again, I understand where he's coming from. I do. We're in a different day and age now, but give me this movie 100 times over, the way it's filmed. I absolutely love it. Let's talk about best scare. Now, we already mentioned a couple times here, not to beat a dead horse or anything, but this is not, in the truest sense of the word, a horror movie. It has horror elements, but it's not true. It's an action sci-fi film more than it's a horror film. But to James Cameron's credit, as I said earlier in the notes from the commentary, he wanted to stay true to the original, so he added and made sure to inject some horror in here. So there are horror elements. It's just not totally a scary movie in that regard. But what was your favorite scare in Aliens? Because there are a few. There are a few good moments.
There are a few, and really there's quite a few if you really think about it. There's just, the movie tonally is so much more action paced, it feels different. But the one that's always gotten me was in the med lab when Ripley and Newt are being attacked by the facehuggers. When I was a kid, that was the scene that actually scared me, that actually terrified me. And watching the facehuggers crawl across the room, watching them latch onto Ripley's neck and try to choke her to death. Like, I was scared of those things. I didn't want those things to attack me. And they were like fully realized in this movie. Whereas I think the limitations in 1979 of the original facehugger, you just had to show the glimpses. You just had to show the pieces. This showed them in full form. And what you realize is, oh God, like, a facehugger trying to attack me in a small room is the scariest thing you could possibly face down, except for an actual alien coming after you.
Yeah, and you know, like, it's such a great scene. Like, the peril in that scene, it's so harrowing, and you really do feel the tension, because that does get shrunk down into one room in this med lab when Ripley wakes up and sees the two canisters broken on the floor, and she realizes, oh shit, we're not alone in here. She reaches up for her gun. It's gone. She knows at that moment Burke is trying to kill us. Like, Burke is trying to get us infected and fucked over here. And so she panics. And that whole scene is great. From her trying to break the window to her lighting the fire to lighting her lighter to get the sprinklers to pump on to the alien dropping out of the ceiling and attacking her and the other one coming up from behind on Newt. The whole thing is incredible. And just the fight. And I love that also. Again, attention to detail. When the Marines finally show up to the room and they realize what's going on, Hicks yells to Hudson, shoot it out. It's tempered glass. You can't just like the door, like when she slams the chair into the glass, it doesn't break. Hicks running into that, he would have just bounced off. So it's a great attention to detail that Hudson shoots it first and then Hicks goes diving through. Yeah. Great scene. Just from top to bottom, that's such a great scene.
Yeah, again, another masterclass in action and elevating stakes throughout a single scene to make it its own contained story. The Med Lab alone is a masterclass in how to do that.
Yeah. So my favorite scare, if I'm being honest, the one that got me the most when I was a kid was definitely the Bishop getting ripped apart. Because again, I thought the movie's over. We won.
Yeah.
But I'm going to, again, much like the get away from her, you bitch, I have to go to the most iconic scare in this movie, which is when the Marines are finally trying to investigate and find the colonists, and one of the Marines holds the woman, and she's like, holds it up, and the woman's eye pops open. She's like, one of them's alive. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Great scene. And also, if you notice, the score, which is by the great James Horner, the score is very quiet. And then he has that real dramatic clash when she opens her eyes. You're that, like, her eyes open. Yeah. Great scene, great scare, great moment, great score. It all plays really well. When she opens her eyes, you're like, oh, shit. And you jump back, and then that's also the only real time we see a chest burster in this movie is when the alien comes bursting out of her, and then Apone, fries it with the flamethrower. But that scene when she pushes her head up and her eyes open, jarring.
And to me, that is like overall, like that moment in that sequence is the most horrific moment in the movie. Like it's definitely like you think she's dead, the eyes pop open. That's classic horror. And then it's a very bloody chestburster scene, like on the order of the original, with minus the guts. But like you see a lot of the blood pooling on her shirt, and then the aliens ripping out and trying to tear after everybody. Like it's probably the most horror centric scare in the entire movie.
Yeah. Speaking of which, let's talk about the best action sequence, because this is a much more action-filled movie than Alien, and we've said that numerous times here. So rather than, talk about other things we sometimes talk about with horror movies, what was your favorite action sequence in Aliens?
This was hard to pick because I love them all. I love every single action sequence that gets laid out in this movie, but it always comes back to get away from her, you bitch. Like Ripley in the loader, now with a big Icelandic guy, behind her. I can't imagine what that must have been like in 1986 to watch that in a movie theater, and it's all done practically. Like it's not even miniatures, because there is another scene earlier in the movie where they're in the loaders and you can tell that it's miniatures and that they're moving them animatronically. This was done practically with the 14-foot alien and the 8-foot Icelandic guy and the loader, all those scenes coming together like that. It's a masterclass. It's incredible how every single thing in that moment works, and all of it is real. Everything you're seeing is real. It's at real scale, and it's really happening. And just all the quick little cuts, the Queen Mother's trying to sting her with her tail, the mouth coming open, and the inner mouth trying to grab at her, the flamethrower, her pinching her and then swinging her over to the dock that she's going to open up, and then dropping her in, but the alien pulls her in. Like, good news, she's going to drop her. Bad news, the alien takes her with her. Good news, she's going to open the airlock. Bad news, the alien grabs her shoe. Good news, her shoe comes off. Great news, the alien flies into the world. But bad news, she's still got to climb up. Good news, she hits the thing. Bad news, her legs is still in the thing as it's closing. Good news, Bishop grabbed Newt. Like, oh my God. Like, what a sequence. What an incredible sequence of action amongst many incredible sequences of action in this film.
So it is an unbelievably great action scene, but I also want to make one mention about the story in that scene, which I love, which is when Ripley comes out in the loader and she says, "Get away from her, you bitch," and you see the Queen Alien, look at her and hiss. What I loved, a little intricacy of that scene that I absolutely adore, is for the first time, the alien doesn't know what to do for a second. It's facing an equal in a way.
Yeah.
It pauses for a second because it's these aliens just attack with ferocious killing in their eyes because they don't fear humans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't fear their prey. But in that moment, seeing a, 8-foot tall, 10-foot tall loader machine with Ripley inside, and it's got these giant claws, and, it's a big ass, metal machine, in theory, that's what it's supposed to be. The alien's like, fuck. This isn't that we're on equal ground now. I'm facing an equal opponent. I can no longer punch down. And it's cool to see the alien react that way because it's kind of like, I don't really know how to attack this thing. And then the fight begins, and it's just pure mayhem at that point. And I love all the little details, like the second mouth coming out and trapping at her, and Ripley ducking out of the way, and the little fire that gets the fire reacts with the alien, then trapping it, and the whole thing. It's just great. Iconic scene.
And by the way, the loader, maybe the ultimate Chekhov's gun in any movie. Because, and if you haven't listened to our other podcasts, Chekhov's gun is a rule in screenwriting, which is if you show something, use it. Well, early in the movie, in a great world building scene, you see that Ripley now has a job as a dock loader, and she's in one of these loader machines. So you see that she can use it. You see that she can use it well, and her and Apone and Hicks are actually marveling at how good she is at it. It's a great little scene. Well, they're just, what's that?
She's like, is there anything I can do? He's like, I don't know. Is there anything you can do? And he's like, well, I can run that loader. I got a class 5 rating. He's like, be my guest. And she loads it up and does all the shit, picks up things. She's like, where do you want it? And he laughs. He's like, Bay 5, Bay 12, please.
Yeah.
They're like, what the fuck? Like, she's like, they think she's just like some timid, consultant that the company brought in. Little do they know that Ripley is a total badass. And that's the moment, not only the Chekhov's gun point where you see her using the loader, which comes back later, but that's also the moment when the Marines gain respect for her. Because even in that initial meeting, when she's kind of becoming emotional and they finally give the alien a name, by the way, the xenomorph, that's the first time we ever hear an alien called a xenomorph in that moment, they're all kind of doubting her, and that's why Vasquez is like, I only need to know one thing, where they are. And they had another great Hudson line where he's like, yeah, they said alien. She thought they said illegal alien and signed up. Like, they're just joking and like mucking, and she's like, I hope you're serious. And they don't take her seriously. Like, they're kind of like, come on, you're goofy, and like, this isn't real. It's not an actual alien. And then her running that loader with Apone and Hicks, they're like, oh shit, like she's real.
Yeah, no, that is genius, right? That is genius screenwriting, which goes, I'm going to give you this scene that delivers many, many, many important things. It delivers incredible character reveal, which is Ripley is not delicate at all. In fact, she's very tough and she's very capable as a person. The Marines respect her in that moment. They change their tune towards her, and you see the ultimate weapon that is going to save the day in the end. All of it matters in this scene that you would assume you could throw away. You go, do we really need that scene? Like, I don't know. It seems it's weird. It's just this little scene where they're kind of laughing and smiling about Ripley. It's kind of a cute scene. It's not, there's nothing to it that's like seems very important to the plot. It's critical to the plot. It's literally like the whole plot unravels if you don't have that scene, but it's the way it was constructed.
Yeah, and they continue to prove throughout this movie what a badass Ripley is. When she takes the car, when Gorman's panicking and he doesn't know what to do, she takes the car and goes and rescues the Marines. There's the great scene where Hicks is showing her how to use the machine gun. She's like, what's this? He's like, that's a grenade launcher. You don't want to mess with that. And she's like, you started this shit. Show me everything. I can handle it. And he goes, I noticed. Like, they all know. Like, she's just the ultimate badass. And, like, she just continues to handle shit throughout this movie. So for me, my favorite action sequence, as you said, I could pick 20 of them from this movie. But I think the one that I always remember, and this is my favorite scene in Aliens. Like if I had to pick a favorite scene in Aliens, this is it. And it's when the Marines first go to battle with the aliens down in that sub-basement. When they're crawling through, there's no movement. It looks like there's just this weird, scaly, bony, whatever they've transformed this basement into. And you're like, what the fuck is this? And you don't see anything. You see the colonists all matted up on the wall and cocooned, but you still don't see the aliens. And then they see there's movement when they roast the facehugger coming out, and they roast the alien, and then all of a sudden there's movement around. Hudson's like, there's movement front and behind. Good, man, I don't see shit. He's like, maybe they don't show up on infrared at all. And then the alien jumps down and grabs the one Marine, pulls her up. The flamethrower goes off. Frost gets done dirty. He gets lit on flame and goes down the bottom of the basement. But that whole sequence when they first get attacked is just nonstop adrenaline and fear. Because it's just mayhem. And then, they open up fire and they're all freaking out. And you see Hicks with the shotgun, the old school shotgun. And Hudson's freaking out like, get the fuck out. Sergeant's dead. Let's get the fuck out of here. Like these total, braggadocious, cocky, very cocksure Marines are like, oh shit, we are being shown up by a superior species right now. And that whole scene from start to finish until they get back in the vehicle, poor Drake gets sacrificed, which I hate. Drake. I love Drake's character. And then the flamethrower comes in. Hudson gets the acid on him when he says, eat this, and fires the Marine, and the burst of acid goes in the air. Just that whole scene is just incredible.
What a sequence of events. And in this version of Good News, Bad News, it's like bad news, worse news is really how this goes. It is the moment that explains that these incredibly badass Marines, which we have set up the entire first part of the movie, how badass they are. Their very first interaction with these aliens, these xenomorphs ambush them, they get folded like almost immediately. They get mowed down immediately by these aliens, and they're not even the hardest aliens to fight. So you immediately understand the stakes. It's super important, this scene. And I just loved all the little attention to detail in this scene. Like when Frost gets hit by the flamethrower, and they very wisely just in a handheld shot pan with him and look down as he falls multiple stories down. Just gives an incredible sense of scale. Like you could have thrown that shot out. You didn't really need it. But Cameron's like, no, I need you to see, like, we are endlessly fucked right about now. Like a flaming body is just going about 6 stories down. And then like, just as you said, the chaos ensues. We're cutting back and forth to the command center, and you're seeing the little screens, and you're seeing it through the eyes of the people in the command center. And it's kind of blurry. And that's a great way, by the way, to hide aliens when you're kind of suiting guys up and you can't put them in the full alien regalia. So you kind of put the heads on them and the arms on them, and it's black enough. And then you shoot a camera shooting a monitor. So it makes it a little bit more hard to see. That fear of the unknown starts to establish itself over that moment, giving it tons of dread. Then you get Vasquez like, let's rock. And she's starting to blow away. And that's a problem because we have already set up. If you hit the reactor, you're going to blow the whole thing to hell. So there's stakes on top of stakes on top of stakes, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And it culminates in like bad news to worst news. We are now down many Marines, and we are clearly outgunned here. It's a great way to set up the stakes of the rest of the movie. It's a critically important. The ambush is so critical to the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it's my favorite scene in the whole movie. Like, just start to finish. If I had to pick one scene that I could just watch over and over and over again, that whole sequence from when they first arrive in that little colony, that little sub-level 3, all the way to when they escape, when Ripley basically overrules Gorman and saves them. That whole sequence is just iconic, and arguably, I mean, it is, to me, the most important scene in the movie because it just sets up everything. It's just so great. I love it.
If you're going to be an action director, Damon, if you're going to be an action director, you have to watch this movie and study it. It is one of the best masterclasses in action ever.
And also, not to get too deep in the weeds, but how they did it all. Like I didn't understand this. they used a lot of mirrors and reflections and a lot of projections and reflections of projections and like so much of the scale. Like one of the things I learned about this film, I had no idea. During the opening scene, when you see the sleep modules, they only had 4. Looks like there's like 12, right? It's all mirrors. So they actually said if you look really closely, and you can notice it in the cut, if you watch really closely, when you look down the line, you can see all of the levels raising. They're like 3 of them look exactly the same because they're mirror images because they didn't have the budget to build more. So they built 4 capsules, and then they just cheated with the reflections, and that's why you did the close-ups of each particular Marine waking up. It's because they only had 4 to work with. So when you've heard that one wide shot where you see all the capsules opening, you'll notice there's like 3 that are like just identically simultaneously opening. It's because they're all the same because it's just a mirror shot.
And I guarantee you a big-ass mirror is cheaper than CG for a couple of days to build out all that shit.
Yeah, but they couldn't afford to build more space pods, more cryopods, so they just used like 4 of them and cheated with that. I just love the little details in this movie.
So fucking cool.
All right, Patrick, this is a good one. We always love to do this category. I tend to make people laugh with my reaction to some of these categories, but this is my favorite one, which is, can we survive this horror film? So, Private Guerra, Private Martin, are we surviving aliens?
I'm glad that you put us as privates because 100% we're definitely more in the Hudson ranks than any of the other people on this crew for sure. Listen, going up against xenomorphs is clearly not easy, Damon. And those were well-trained, well-versed Marines, by the way. You learn in the mess hall. They've seen other aliens. They've even probably had sex with other aliens. They've talked about it. Like, they've certainly lived many lives as Space Marines. And so when they come into this, they're very seasoned. And a private is probably one of the least seasoned guys on the team. So you and I as privates are probably not getting out. That's not to say we're not getting out without a fight. I would say we're more of the Hudson ilk where it's like, oh, I'll just go down shooting if I need to. For myself personally, I know I think more like Ripley, and I probably think like Ripley because I grew up with Ripley and I grew up with her sensibilities. So I'd love to believe that I would last a little bit longer. But truth be told, for all the years that we have enjoyed the Alien series, there's one thing for sure. The lone survivor is always Ripley. So I don't think I'm getting out of this one.
In my head, and I'm not I don't think I've ever told this story in the show. My family has deep military ties. My brothers both served, my dad served, my grandparents served. I was the first kid in my family not to go in the military. Like, I didn't go in the military, but I have very deep military ties. So I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I understand the military because I've been there, because I haven't. But I feel like I do understand it better than the average person because of so many of my family members have served at war times. My brother fought in Desert Storm and the Iraq War. So like I know, I've seen the stories, heard the stories, talked about it. So I feel like I understand a little bit better. In my head, like in my testosterone-filled macho head, I'd be Drake. I'd be the badass who would go down with the fucking flamethrowers, still firing, and, unfortunately he gets doused with acid and he dies. I always Drake was such a badass. Like, he was like the man's man of Marines. But I'm not. I'd love to say that I'm Drake, but I'm not. I'm 100% going to be Hudson. I'm going to be like, game over, man. Game over. What the fuck are we going to do now? What are we going to do? So, listen. Would I like to think I'd survive? Would I like to think I'd be Hicks and be the last man standing to go out with Ripley? I'd hope so, but let's be honest. I'm going to be Hudson. I'm going to panic a little bit. I'm going to calm down and do my job, just like Hudson does in this movie, but I will go down firing, and you're going to have to rip me down in there, and you're going to have to tear me away. But, yeah, I'm probably not going to make it. Put me in the air duct. I'm falling through those bastards. I know that. But
hey, put me down in the water with Newt, and I'm like, Newt, I can't get my head over the water. Will you please go to the shallow end?
Yeah. So no, I'm probably not making it out alive, but I will take a few of those bastards down with me on the way down. Like I said, I would love to believe I'm Drake. I'm probably more Hudson, and either way, I'm dead. So. Yeah, I'm not making it out of this one alive. Also, one other little thing I want to mention, one other little thing that Bill Paxton and Michael Biehn did in this movie that wasn't in the script, which I loved. In the scene where Hudson is shooting at the aliens, and the alien comes up from under the ground and grabs him and starts pulling him down. He's firing. He's like, "You want some? You want some too?" And it grabs him. In the original version, he just gets dragged underneath. It was Michael Biehn and Bill Paxton they should try to save each other, and so it's Michael Biehn who suggested he should go down and try to grab Hudson as he's getting dragged away, which he does. He grabs Hudson's arm, tries to pull him back. Obviously doesn't work. Hudson gets dragged down and dragged away by the alien, and then Hicks fires at the alien overhead. But the original version was just Hicks getting dragged down, and that was it. It was Michael Biehn and Bill Paxton said, wouldn't they try to save each other? Wouldn't they try to help their brother? And sure enough, Michael Biehn goes over and tries to grab the hand, and sadly, Hudson still gets pulled down and killed. But I love that little attention to detail. They're like, they would try to save their brothers.
Yeah, you got to trust your actors when they give you suggestions like that. Let them play. Let them have the moment. For all you burgeoning directors out there that listen, don't be afraid to let your actor try something on a take. Do the version that's in the script. But you get that version that Michael Biehn and Bill Paxton suggested, you get a better moment, a richer moment. So try it out. Try it, shoot it. We're all shooting digital these days. They were shooting on film. Shoot on digital, shoot the take, let them try it out, and you might get something like that, because that's a great moment.
Yeah, totally separate from this film, just to throw this out there. If you are a fan of Martin Scorsese movies, Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, Killers of the Flower Moon, whatever it is, he is a huge improv director. He loves for his cast to improv and try things. A lot of what you see in Martin Scorsese's movies, some of the most iconic moments in Martin Scorsese's movies are ad-libbed. They're just totally improv on the moment. Like that iconic scene in Wolf of Wall Street when Leonardo DiCaprio is asking his guys, can you sell? And there's that great scene with John Bernthal. A lot of that's all ad-libbed. That's not in the original script, and they just ad-libbed a lot of that. And Martin Scorsese is like, oh, that's great, we're leaving that in. So, yeah, don't be afraid to take chances, because it may work out really well.
Totally, dude. The best directors do that. The best directors let their actors play. Don't be a fucking megalomaniac and think only your words are the only ones that matters. Let them try.
Well, then you get Tarantino, who is very much that guy who says, you say what's on my script on my page and don't say anything else. So you can get genius out of it. Tarantino is like, no, that's not in my script. Don't say that. So there are...
It happens, but again, you feel a certain way about Tarantino. I go, boy, I wish you would have let someone try something else there. But that's the difference between our taste.
But that's what I'm saying, though. Like I said, there's no perfect right or way wrong, but right. I tend to lean more towards the Scorsese side, which is let him cook a little bit. Let him see. If it doesn't work, you don't use it, but let him try. So
and also, I do think, and this is a total diversion, I do think that Quentin insists on giving that air of the idea that no one is allowed to suggest anything. And I think the truth is in behind closed doors in quiet little conversations, Leo goes, I'm going to try this. And Quentin goes, of course you're going to try this. You're Leo DiCaprio. I really think it's just a smokescreen that Quentin likes to put up in front. But I guarantee you he gets those great performances because him and the actors go off and have a little conversation. And he justifies it in his head as, well, yeah, that's what I meant to write. So go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and I do love, by the way, like I said, there's limits. Michael Biehn grabbing for Bill Paxton. He's getting dragged underneath. That's a really cool scene. I am glad, however, that James Cameron didn't take Sigourney Weaver's notes, and she used guns, she didn't die, and she didn't have sex with an alien. So I'm glad those notes didn't make it into the movie.
I really want to know, if we ever get the chance to interview Sigourney Weaver, I want to ask her, how did you envision that scene going down? I really want to know how you envisioned having sex with a xenomorph.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Real quick, before we get on to our final category and get out of here, we are going to be in our next film talking about Alien 3, which there's going to be a real conversation about the original version of that movie, what ended up being in that movie, all the different things. But I did note during the commentary, this is the one thing I didn't talk about yet from the commentary, the commentary track for Aliens was filmed in 2003. So this is years after David Fincher's Alien 3 had come out. James Cameron talked about that, and he said, I like David Fincher, Alien 3, whatever. But he mentioned what, again, not to get ahead of our review, but he said basically what everyone else has ever said their critique of that movie is. Their biggest critique of that movie is he said, there were 3 survivors in the movie. It was Newt, Ripley, and Hicks. And you move on to Alien 3, and he just erased all of that. Like, all the feeling, all the love. And he's like, I think, one of the things he said is, I think one of the reasons why Alien 3 didn't do as well critically or commercially and get the reaction from fans is because they had invested so much into Newt, Ripley, and Hicks. And then to just kill 2 of them off to start the next movie just pissed off a lot of people because you spent so much time getting invested in those characters, and they made it. They got out to just kill them off screen to start the 3rd film. You could tell James Cameron didn't like it. I don't like it. I think a lot of people, will get into that with our next review, but I have to mention that because James Cameron said it during the commentary. Is like, you could tell he didn't get snarky about it. He didn't get like, fuck that movie. He didn't say that, but you could tell in his commentary, he's like, I think that's what immediately set people against that movie, because you had such a connection with those 3 characters and they made it, especially the relationship with Newt and Ripley. To just erase that to start the 3rd film, it pissed off a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have had this discussion off air often, as I'm not as precious about movies as everybody else is. Like, and I know I'm in the minority. It never bothered me. I even though I grew up and loved, and the original language for me in the Alien universe was the Aliens movie, was Ripley, Hicks, and Newt. It never bothered me. And I saw Alien 3 in the theater. We'll get into that. We'll talk about all that. It just never bothered me, but I'm different. Like, people go, oh, you're fucking with my childhood. You're fucking with the things that are super important with me. I just go, I don't care, whatever the next thing is. But that's me. And I know most people don't feel that way. But to me, I was just like, that's fine. We're telling a new story. We're doing a new thing.
And to be fair, and we'll get into it, like, I don't mind Alien 3 as a movie. There's a lot I like about that movie, actually. Like,
I'm excited to revisit it. I'm excited that that's our next topic.
So there are, don't get me wrong. Like, while I don't like that, I'm with you on the side of, like, ultimately I still really enjoy that movie. And I don't think I know David Fincher hates that movie. Like, he does not like that movie at all. He barely talks about it. He really recognizes it as part of his filmography. But I actually do find a lot to like about Alien 3. Here's the one thing I would say about this franchise now that we're in the first sequel, real quick before we get out of here. Ridley Scott has gone on the record and say he was never approached or asked about coming back to do a second Aliens movie. Never approached him. And there's rumors that, he's kind of hard to work with, and they're just like, we don't want to work with this guy, so let's just move on. I do wish, and this goes to the new Star Wars sequels that I have a lot of issues with. Now, I'm not going to open a debate right now to talk about Last Jedi, because I know we don't want to go there. That'll be a whole other podcast, Patrick. But I think part of the biggest problem with the new Star Wars trilogy is kind of what infected the first Alien trilogy, before we get into Alien Resurrection and the other films, is not having that singular voice telling the story. One of my biggest issues with the Star Wars, when you're talking about Force Awakens, Last Jedi,
Sure.
Rise of Skywalker, is they never really had a through line. They're just like, okay, we're going to make this first film, and then we're going to give Ryan Johnson the second film. We're going to give another guy the third film. We're just going to do it. Colin Trevorrow, whatever. We're just going to do it. And they never had a set story in place, and so you can tell they made a lot of changes. They kept going back and fixing this, and what happened in the third film was never really what was intended in the first film, like that. You know what I mean? And J.J. Abrams, yes, he came back to direct the third one, but it was by default. He wasn't supposed to. It was just a mess. The one regret I have about Alien, even though I adore aliens, don't get me wrong, like, I adore aliens. And to be fair, Ridley Scott was the director, Dan O'Bannon was the writer, but I wish there had been a more singular vision for these three films in particular. Now, because you said Ridley Scott doesn't like Aliens, I think Aliens is perfect. I think it's the perfect follow-up to Alien. Bigger in scope, bigger in scale, bigger in action. It feels different yet the same. Same universe, much different film. And I love both. I do wish there had been some element of that in Alien 3 where they had been like, okay, here's how we ended it. Let's pick it up, and here's where the story's going to go. And that's where that film kind of fails a little bit, and I think it failed a little bit with the audience, was that. because there was not that through line. You could tell there was no singular vision for these movies. Now, again, that's a different time. That wasn't necessarily the case. George Lucas was a rarity where he had a very thematic story in line when he made Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. That was not the commonality of that era, right? Like, you didn't really get that. Like, Richard Donner's version of Superman 2 was different than what they did in Superman 1. Or, you know what I mean? Like, that just, they weren't necessarily consumed by that at that time. But I do wish there had been a more singular voice going from 1, 2 to 3 in Aliens. That's my only, I would say I wish I had that.
I mean, that's a much bigger conversation that we will get into in Alien 3 for sure. But for the time, I'm actually not that mad about it, because the truth is, yes, you're right about the new Star Wars movies, but they were still overseen by J.J. Abrams and his team, who are the team behind Lost, who are the team behind Let's Have No Plan. So consider that.
But he had no say in Last Jedi, though. That was all Rian Johnson from script to screen. That was
it's true, but at the same time, it's like there was still very much an idea of like, let's just flow with it, which was kind of birthed out of the era of let's have no plan, let's just go into each one. There's different directors on Return of the or Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I know a lot of people shit on Return of the Jedi. It's not that bad. Like, the Ewoks are not that bad. Like, everybody needs to calm down. It's not that bad. But they're all different directors and they're different visions, overseen by George Lucas loosely. I know he's there guiding it. So it doesn't really bother me. And the Alien movies have zero guidance. They have no one looking after them. And so for those first 3 especially, I'm like not really mad at it, because the way they fall together in a weird way worked for me. But we're going to talk about Alien 3 next. That's coming down the line after this one. I'm excited to get into it. It's been a long time since I visited Alien 3, so I'm looking forward to seeing it with a different eye this time around, and seeing how it kind of concludes what I believe is the Ripley story. I believe the Ripley story ends in these first 3 movies. And we're going to get into that very soon. Tune in to find out.
I'm excited. I actually saw Alien 3, and that was the first one I saw in the theater, was Alien 3.
Me too.
Did, because I saw it.
Me
When
too.
did it come out? When did Alien 3 come out?
Oh, I want to say 91 or something, 90, 91, somewhere in there.
Because I had seen Aliens, and then Alien 3 came out. I was like, oh, Alien 3. I do remember, because I remember going to see it. I was a little kid, and I remember my dad had to go in and tell the theater goer I was allowed to go see it because it was R-rated, and they actually checked me. Like, I was a kid. Like, I was a kid. And they're like, this is an R-rated, like hard R-rated movie. And my dad's like, he's got permission. And then he left and picked me up later. And actually, I remember, I think I remember, and I have to double check the timing of this, but I feel like this was the movie I saw Alien 3, and I snuck over and saw Buffy the Vampire Slayer after. I feel like it's around that time. There was some movie with this. I went and saw like a double feature. I snuck from one theater and then watched another movie later. I remember that. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. I'm excited to get into Alien 3 in our next one. But before we wrap up Aliens, as we always do, Patrick, let's close out with our final category, which is it scary? And Patrick, let's be honest, this isn't really a scary movie. It's not meant to be. But what I will say, there's incredible tension, incredible dread, a word that you use all the time and I absolutely adore. It's that. So is it truly scary? Is it alien scary? No, it's not.
No.
But are there harrowing moments? Are there just pulse thumping, just edge of your seat, clutch your pearls moments? Absolutely. From the alien attack when they first meet the aliens to the escape to Bishop getting ripped in half, I would argue those are enough to what I would consider this to be a great action horror film. Is it really scary? No, but there are definitely horror elements.
Is it scary? No, but is it thrilling? Oh, hell yes. It's an incredibly thrilling movie, laced with dread, by the way. It's just a different type of dread. But make no mistake, even before they ever leave the base station, dread is completely laced through this movie. And that's what you need to have a great horror film. And this is indeed one of the greats, maybe the greatest sequel of all time, probably the greatest sequel of all time. Empire Strikes Back has something to say about that. But the truth be told, it's probably the greatest sequel of all time. And it's just covered in dread. It's covered in dread until the very last moment. You cannot ever let up on this movie. It delivers top to bottom. It's such a fun ride. I'm so glad we had an epic podcast to talk about it because it is one of the most epic movies of all time.
When you're talking about aliens and the conversation goes about sequels, you talk about what's the best sequel of all time, it's Aliens. You know what?
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hudson. You couldn't have said it better.
All right, folks, that's our podcast for this week. As always, we want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes into the show. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, over on our YouTube channel. If you want to see the video of our reactions to everything we're saying, you can watch us over on YouTube. You got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, your reaction when you first saw Aliens. I'd love to hear some reactions from other folks. Because I saw this movie as a kid, and you did too, so I was not around. So I would love to hear the reaction to some people who saw Aliens maybe in the theater. If there's anybody out there who saw it in the theater when it came out, I'd love to see that. Send us an email, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or send us a message on social media. You can find us at Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels, and you are more than happy to reach out to us there as well. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes in each and every week to the podcast. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Game over, man.